My name is Beverly Stein. I'm 34 years old. 3 days ago, I stood on a stepladder in my kitchen, cracked the combination to an old bear-proof wall safe hidden behind my winter crockpots, and found a forged power of attorney document granting my husband total control over my life's work. The scent of his expensive cedarwood cologne still clung to the pristine pages. He was not just planning to divorce me. He was quietly orchestrating a hostile takeover of the Alaskan Wilderness Logistics Company I built from the ground up, preparing to leave me with nothing. What he did not know was that while he was busy playing the mastermind, I was already calculating how to drop an avalanche directly onto his perfectly manicured life. Before I tell you exactly how I ruined him, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Samantha Told Stories, but only if you genuinely enjoy the ride. And I would love to know, how old are you and where are you listening from today? Let me take you back to Tuesday morning. The air outside my Anchorage home was bitter, hovering around -10 degrees. The jagged peaks of the Chugach Mountains cut a sharp silhouette against the slate-gray sky. Inside the house was silent. My husband Nolan was supposed to be 400 miles away in Juneau, attending a dull corporate consulting seminar. He had kissed my forehead at dawn, his breath smelling of dark roast coffee and peppermint, telling me he would call as soon as his flight landed. I believed him. I had no reason not to. But my trust unraveled an hour later when I opened his home office desk drawer to borrow a charging cable. Pushed to the very back, beneath a stack of dry cleaning receipts, sat a small, black leather notebook. Nolan was meticulous about his digital security, but he always kept physical backups of his passwords, disguised as mundane notes. I flipped it open, intending only to move it aside. A specific entry caught my eye. A golf handicap. 1248. Nolan despised golf. He complained that the wind ruined his swing. But those numbers matched the configuration of the ancient heavy-duty wall safe hidden deep inside our walk-in pantry. The previous owners installed it, and I had lost the combination 5 years ago. I always considered it a useless hunk of steel taking up space behind my oversized winter crockpots. Nolan knew I never touched it. I carried the notebook into the kitchen. My bare feet moved silently across the heated hardwood floors. I dragged the aluminum stepladder into the pantry, climbed 2 steps, and shoved the heavy ceramic crockpots aside. The cold steel of the safe dial bit into my fingertips. 12 right, 40 left, 8 right. A heavy mechanical clunk vibrated through the metal. The thick door swung open with a dry groan. The scent hit me first. Cedarwood and bergamot. Nolan's signature cologne. I reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a stack of pristine manila folders. The paper felt crisp, untouched by the aviation grease, diesel fuel, and spilled coffee that usually coated the cargo manifests I handled every day. I run Northern Reach Logistics. I built the freight network from a single rusted bush plane I inherited from my grandfather, transforming it into a fleet that keeps remote wilderness outposts alive through brutal sub-zero winters. My world requires calluses and grit. Nolan operates in a world of pressed suits and polite smiles. I opened the top folder. The first page was a power of attorney agreement. My name sat at the bottom, adorned with a signature mimicking my handwriting. My breath hitched, forming a tight knot in my throat. I stared at the curves of the letters. The strokes lacked the sharp downward pressure I apply when authorizing heavy cargo shipments. I only ever sign legal documents with a black felt-tip pen. This was traced in standard blue ink. This piece of paper granted Nolan Stein unrestricted access to my sole proprietorship corporate accounts. He could liquidate my fleet, sell my grandfather's downtown warehouse, and empty my operating funds with a single phone call. I set the forgery aside, my hands steadying, as a cold, unfamiliar clarity washed over me. Beneath the legal draft lay a series of wire transfer ledgers. Columns of numbers marched steadily toward a holding entity registered in the Grand Cayman Islands. He was not just planning an exit strategy. He was actively siphoning my life's work while I slept beside him. I stared at the numbers, letting the reality settle into my bones. $700,000. That was the figure sitting in the Cayman account. I recognized the origin of those funds immediately. Last year, I spent 4 months sleeping on a cot in my dispatcher office, coordinating emergency supply drops for remote mining camps during a record-breaking blizzard. I missed holidays. I lost weight. Nolan stayed home, claiming he was managing the household and offering emotional support. He told me I was working too hard, that I needed to step back and let him help manage the administrative side of the business so I could breathe. I gave him partial access to my accounting software. I thought I was leaning on my partner. Instead, I was handing the keys to a thief. He had been quietly skimming the profits from that grueling winter season, funneling the money through dummy vendors before routing it offshore. The betrayal tasted like copper in the back of my mouth. My pulse tapped a quiet, rapid rhythm against my collarbone. I did not cry. Crying is a biological waste of energy, and up here, the cold teaches you early that panic is a liability. You assess the cracked ice, you check your survival gear, you adapt. I pulled my smartphone from my denim pocket and silenced the camera flash. I captured the forged signature. I photographed the offshore routing digits. I documented every fraudulent page, quietly building a digital armory in the palm of my hand. I zoomed in on the holding company details, ensuring the account numbers were legible. When I finished, I aligned the folders with meticulous care, recreating their exact original placement down to the millimeter. I placed them back into the steel cavity, shut the heavy door, and spun the dial. The tumblers secured with a definitive thud. I shifted the bulky winter crockpots back onto the shelf, erasing all evidence of my discovery. The pantry looked exactly as it had an hour ago. I stepped down the ladder and reached for the pantry doorknob. A sharp electronic sequence pierced the quiet house. Beep, 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 chirp. The front entryway security keypad. Someone had just bypassed the primary lock. Nolan was supposed to be in Juneau. I stood frozen in the kitchen shadows as the heavy oak front door creaked open. The distinct sharp impact of hard-heeled designer boots echoed across the entryway hardwood. The heavy footfalls echoing down the hallway did not belong to a thief breaking through a window. They were sharp, rhythmic, and carried an undeniable air of ownership. I recognized that cadence. It belonged to Patricia Stein, my mother-in-law. Patricia was an Anchorage socialite of the highest order. She operated in a world of charity galas, private art auctions, and catered luncheons, viewing the rest of the Alaskan population as the hired help. From the day Nolan introduced us, Patricia had looked at me as a temporary, unfortunate stain on her family lineage. To her, I was just a girl with grease under her fingernails who spent too much time on cargo tarmacs. She tolerated me only because my logistics company pulled in a 7-figure annual revenue, though she always credited Nolan for my financial success. I expected her to call out my name to announce her uninvited arrival. Instead, the house remained quiet. The footsteps bypassed the kitchen, ignored the living room, and headed straight down the corridor toward my home office. I moved silently on my bare feet, tracking her path. The door to my office stood ajar. I peered through the crack, holding my breath. Patricia stood over my solid mahogany desk. She still wore her full-length mink coat, a garish display of wealth that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of my practical, rugged life. Snow melted off the shoulders of the fur, dripping onto my hardwood floors. But she was not looking at the decor. Her manicured fingers were actively flipping through the pages of my primary client ledger, the thick binder where I tracked seasonal freight contracts and vendor routing schedules. Her eyes darted rapidly across the columns of numbers, absorbing the financial lifeblood of Northern Reach Logistics. She was hunting. She was looking for weaknesses, for uncollected invoices, for any sign that the company was bleeding cash. I pushed the door open, letting the hinges emit a soft squeak. Patricia startled her shoulders, jumping beneath the heavy mink. She spun around, her hand flying to her chest in a theatrical display of shock. But beneath the widened eyes and the practiced gasp, I saw the cold, calculating glint of a predator caught outside its territory. "Oh, Beverly, darling," Patricia breathed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You frightened me. I let myself in with the spare code. I thought you might be at the airfield today, so I wanted to pop by and check on the house while Nolan is stuck down in that dreary seminar in Juneau." I kept my expression soft, offering a warm, weary smile. "I decided to work from home this morning, Patricia. Is there a reason you are digging through my seasonal shipping manifests?" Patricia did not miss a beat. She closed the heavy binder with a dismissive flick of her wrist, stepping away from the desk, as if the financial records bored her. "Goodness, no!" she chuckled, a high, breathy sound that grated against my ears. "I was simply looking for a scrap of paper. I wanted to leave you a little note on the counter, saying I had stopped by, just in case you were sleeping upstairs. I know how exhausted you get running those little planes of yours." She reached into her oversized designer handbag, the leather stiff and pristine, and pulled out a pen. It was a distinctive writing instrument. The barrel was thick, crafted from brushed silver, with a heavy weighted balance. She grabbed a sticky note from the edge of my monitor and leaned over the desk to write. My eyes locked onto the tip of the pen as it glided across the yellow paper. The ink was a deep, vibrant blue. It was the exact shade, the exact thickness, and the exact slight pooling quality of the ink used on the forged power of attorney document I had just photographed inside the hidden wall safe. The realization hit me with the force of a frozen gale. Nolan did not forge my signature. Patricia did. The matriarch of the Stein family sat in her pristine estate and meticulously traced my handwriting, legally binding my assets over to her son. The coordination required for this betrayal meant they had been planning this for months, exchanging documents, practicing my signature, and setting up offshore holding accounts while sitting across from me at Sunday dinners. Patricia finished her useless note and set the heavy silver pen down on the edge of the mahogany desk, seemingly forgetting to return it to her purse in her haste to change the subject. "Well, since you are awake, we should catch up," Patricia said, waving a hand toward the hallway. "Let us go to the kitchen. It is freezing in this wing of the house. I do not understand how you tolerate this draft." I followed her into the kitchen, letting her lead the way in my own home. I needed to play the role of the oblivious, exhausted wife perfectly. If she sensed even a fraction of the cold fury hardening inside my chest, the entire trap would spring prematurely. Patricia draped her damp mink coat over the back of one of my custom oak dining chairs. She ran a single diamond-ringed finger along the edge of the kitchen island, inspecting the polished granite for dust. Her lips curled into a familiar, condescending sneer as she looked around at the exposed timber beams and the woven native rugs I had sourced from local artisans. "It is always so rustic in here, Beverly," she remarked, brushing a non-existent crumb off the countertop. "Very charming for a cabin, I suppose, but Nolan grew up with a certain standard of refinement. I always worry he feels a bit stifled by all this rough wood and dark leather. It lacks a certain elegance." "It is built for the climate, Patricia," I replied smoothly, leaning against the counter and crossing my arms. "We prefer durability over delicate things. How is your morning going?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Busy as always. Planning the winter gala takes a toll. But enough about me. Nolan mentioned on the phone yesterday that you have been incredibly stressed. Something about overhead costs and supply chain delays. He sounded quite worried about you, darling. He hates seeing you struggle with the burden of that business. There it was. The fishing expedition. She was trying to confirm if the logistics company was vulnerable. If they were planning to bankrupt me, they needed to know how much liquid cash I had on hand to fight back. I forced a tired sigh, rubbing my temples as if fighting off a migraine. It has been a challenging quarter, I admitted, injecting just enough vulnerability into my voice to feed her ego. The late freeze disrupted the supply routes to the northern mining camps. We had to ground 3 planes for emergency maintenance, which ate into the operating budget. It is nothing I cannot handle, but the margins are certainly tighter than I would like right now. Patricia's eyes gleamed with a predatory satisfaction. She tried to mask it with a sympathetic pout, but the corners of her mouth twitched upward. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, stepping closer and placing a cold, clammy hand on my arm. "That sounds terribly overwhelming. You really should let Nolan step in and help you manage the finances. He has such a brilliant mind for corporate restructuring. You shouldn't have to carry this heavy load all by yourself." I will definitely consider that, I said, maintaining steady eye contact. He is always so supportive. To solidify the facade, I pushed off the counter and grabbed my phone. "Since you are here, why don't I order us some lunch? I know you love that French bistro downtown." My treat. The business can cover a good meal. Patricia beamed, her chest puffing with victory. "That sounds delightful, Beverly. The duck confit salad, please." I opened the delivery app, my fingers moving mechanically. I selected her overpriced salad and a black coffee for myself. I tapped the payment screen, navigating to the saved corporate credit card tied directly to Northern Reach Logistics' primary operating account. This was the account that held payroll, aviation fuel budgets, and vendor payments. I hit submit. A spinning loading wheel appeared on the bright screen. I waited, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Patricia humming a classical tune under her breath. The screen flashed red. "Payment declined. Please contact your banking institution." I stared at the glowing pixels. A cold numbness spread from my fingertips up through my forearms. I deleted the card verification code and typed it in again, assuming a simple network error. Submit. Red screen. Payment declined. Account locked. The fake smile on my face threatened to slip. The primary account was not just empty. It was frozen. The financial lifeline of my entire company had been severed while I was making small talk about duck confit. Patricia stood 5 feet away, pretending to admire the view of the mountains out the window, knowing exactly what was happening on my phone screen. They were executing the final phase of their plan, pulling the rug out from under my feet before Nolan even returned to town. "Oh, the banking application must be experiencing a network glitch," I told Patricia, keeping my voice smooth and untroubled. The lies slid off my tongue with practiced ease. She bought it. Or at least, she pretended to accept the excuse. She slipped her damp mink coat back over her narrow shoulders, kissed the empty air an inch from my cheek, and strutted out the front door. The heavy oak slammed shut, the brass deadbolt clicking into place with a sharp, metallic finality. The sudden silence in the kitchen felt heavier than a midwinter snowdrift. I stared down at the red notification blaring on my phone screen. The corporate card was dead. I did not throw the device against the wall. I did not scream into the empty room. My hands shook a subtle, involuntary tremor that rippled through my knuckles, but my mind was already racing miles ahead of the rising panic. I opened my contacts and dialed the direct priority line to the Commercial Fraud Division at First Alaskan Bank. A cheerful synthetic jazz hold music filtered through the speakerphone. The upbeat saxophone notes clashed discordantly against the freezing terror expanding in my chest. I paced the length of the heated hardwood floor, my bare feet carrying me back and forth past the island counter. I thought about the aviation fuel suppliers, expecting their scheduled payment on Friday morning. I thought about my pilots, the rugged men and women who risked their lives navigating the treacherous northern thermal drafts, trusting me to sign their paychecks on time. Northern Reach Logistics was not just a hobby. It was the vital artery for half a dozen remote mining outposts. We delivered engine components, emergency medical supplies, and fresh provisions to locations where roads simply did not exist. If we missed a payroll cycle, the aviation union would ground my fleet within 24 hours. Nolan knew this operational vulnerability perfectly. He was systematically cutting off my oxygen supply, engineering a crisis that would tear the company apart from the inside. The music abruptly stopped. Thank you for calling Commercial Services. My name is David. How can I assist you today? The voice was brisk, polite, and terribly unaware of the collapse of my universe. I verified my identity, rattling off my federal tax identification number and the secure passphrases I had memorized years ago. My primary operating account was just locked during a routine vendor transaction, I stated, forcing my vocal cords to remain steady. I need the restriction lifted immediately so I can process payroll. I heard the rhythmic hollow clacking of a keyboard on the other end of the line. Then a long pause followed. It was the kind of heavy, breathless pause that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand straight up. Ms. Stein, your account was restricted by our automated security matrix, David explained, his tone dropping an octave into something much more serious. 2 hours ago, an outgoing wire transfer of $120,000 was initiated. The request utilized the power of attorney credential currently on file for Nolan Stein. $120,000. That figure represented my entire liquid operating buffer. It was the cash reserve designed to keep the planes flying if a freak blizzard shut down the regional supply chains for an extended month. Cancel it, I instructed. My voice sounded flat, stripped of the raw dread clawing at the back of my throat. I did not authorize that transfer. The power of attorney document you have on file is a forgery. I understand your concern, ma'am, David replied, his standard corporate de-escalation training kicking in. However, the credential was formally notarized and submitted through standard legal channels last week. The system processed the wire request based on that verified authority. My fingernails dug into the smooth granite countertop until the nail beds turned white. Are you telling me the money is already gone? Not exactly, David said, offering a microscopic sliver of relief. The destination routing number triggered an anti-money laundering alert in our compliance software. The recipient is listed as a holding entity in the Cayman Islands, a location which currently sits on a restricted federal watch list for high-risk transactions. The funds are temporarily frozen in an international clearinghouse, pending further verification. A sharp breath escaped my lungs. So, reverse the transfer and put the funds back in my account. I cannot do that, he answered apologetically. Because Mr. Stein is an authorized signatory on the corporate profile, we cannot simply cancel the transaction based on a verbal dispute between spouses. The freeze is a temporary federal hold meant to prevent capital flight, not a cancellation. To reverse the funds and permanently revoke his access to the accounts, we require an emergency court order, signed by an authorized judge. The trap was exquisite in its cruelty. Nolan had calculated the exact parameters of commercial banking law. He knew the offshore flag would delay the transfer, but he also knew the bureaucratic red tape would paralyze me. By the time I hired a litigator, drafted an affidavit, and managed to secure a hearing with an Anchorage judge, precious days would pass. My business would default on its immediate operational debts long before I ever saw the inside of a courtroom. He was orchestrating a controlled demolition of my enterprise. He aimed to declare bankruptcy before he ever filed the divorce petition. He wanted me destitute, legally entangled, and desperate enough to accept whatever meager settlement he tossed my way just to keep the lights on. I ended the call with David, placing the phone face down on the counter. The kitchen felt degrees colder now. I looked out the frost-rimmed window at the rugged, snow-swept landscape. Surviving in Alaska requires a fundamental understanding of predator behavior. When a grizzly bear spots a weakness, it does not hesitate. It strikes to incapacitate its target swiftly. Nolan was banking on me reacting like fragile prey. He expected me to dissolve into tears to call his phone, begging for an explanation, to waste precious hours confronting him with emotional accusations. But I was raised by a man who navigated frozen tundras with nothing but a magnetic compass and a hunting rifle. My grandfather taught me that, when you are ambushed in the wild, you do not cry. You secure your remaining rations, you find high ground, and you prepare to hunt the thing that is hunting you. I flipped open my laptop on the kitchen island. The primary operating account was crippled, but it was not the only financial artery in my logistics network. I had seasonal client contracts, outstanding invoices from the mining conglomerates, and federal mail delivery subsidies scheduled to hit the ledgers by the end of the week. If those incoming receivables landed in the compromised account, Nolan would sweep them up in his next fraudulent wire transfer. I navigated to a separate encrypted browser, accessing a private wealth management portal I had established years ago, but rarely utilized. Within 10 frantic minutes, I created a secure, isolated trust under a distinct corporate classification. I used my maiden name and a separate tax identification number tied to a dormant holding company my grandfather had left me. The system generated a fresh set of routing digits, entirely unlinked to my marriage or the primary business profile. Next, I logged into my logistics invoicing software. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing commands with ruthless precision. I intercepted every pending invoice, every scheduled direct deposit, and every client payment portal link. I wiped the old banking details from the digital matrix and hard-coded the new hidden trust account into the billing system. It was a tedious, high-stakes digital operation. One missed keystroke could alert Nolan to my countermeasure. But I worked methodically, checking every routing number twice. Over $80,000 in pending receivables were successfully diverted into the shadows, placed far beyond the reach of Nolan's forged legal documents. I closed the laptop, letting the screen fade to black. I had cauterized the financial wound. The business would survive the week. I had secured my war chest. Now I needed to dismantle the rest of his elaborate illusion. Nolan claimed he was attending a continuing education seminar in Juneau, a short commercial flight down the coast. If he was coordinating offshore wire transfers and plotting corporate sabotage with his mother, he was likely not sitting in a dreary hotel conference room discussing corporate synergy. I needed to verify his alibi. I needed to know exactly where the enemy was standing. I picked up my smartphone and opened his contact profile. I needed to test the parameters of his lie, to hear the deception in real time, and to pinpoint his actual location without tipping my hand. I pressed the green call button, brought the speaker to my ear, and listened to the dial tone echo in the silent kitchen, waiting for my traitorous husband to answer the line. The digital ringtone vibrated against my ear, each rhythmic pulse feeling like a countdown. Nolan answered on the fourth ring. His voice dropped into a sharp, breathy whisper, painting the perfect auditory illusion of a man trapped in a crowded, quiet room. "Hey, sweetheart, I can barely talk right now," he murmured, feigning an apologetic tone. "The regional director is right in the middle of a dreadful presentation about fourth quarter synergy. Juneau is pouring rain, by the way. I am just trapped in this freezing conference center. Is everything okay at home?" My husband was a masterclass in casual deception. He peppered his lies with tiny, mundane details to anchor them in reality. A less observant wife would picture the boring seminar, the rain lashing against the hotel windows, the dutiful partner suffering through corporate monotony. But I did not hear rain. I heard the unmistakable, resonant chime of a public address system. Just beneath his hushed breathing, a crisp, automated female voice echoed through his phone microphone. "Please hold on. The doors are closing. Next stop, Concourse B." A cold chill cascaded down my spine, entirely unrelated to the Alaskan winter outside. I knew that exact synthetic voice. I had traveled through the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport countless times to negotiate seasonal freight contracts with lower 48 distributors. Nolan was not sitting in a dreary Juneau seminar. He was 4 time zones south, standing inside the underground transit terminal of a major financial hub. My mind calculated the trajectory instantly. Seattle housed some of the most ruthless offshore trust attorneys and high-end commercial liquidators on the West Coast. He was using the money he had just siphoned from my logistics enterprise to finalize the architecture of his betrayal in person. I kept my breathing shallow, ensuring my voice remained warm and entirely untroubled. "Everything is fine here, honey," I replied, injecting a convincing note of domestic boredom into my words. "I am just reviewing some tedious shipping manifests. I will let you get back to your meeting. Call me tonight when you return to your hotel." "Will do. Love you, Bev." "Love you too," I said, severing the connection. By letting him believe the geographic lie held firm, I secured the most valuable asset in any conflict. I possessed an accurate timeline. Nolan thought he was operating in the shadows, invisible and untethered. I opened a secure, encrypted messaging application on my device. I needed eyes on the ground in Washington state immediately. I navigated to a contact listed simply as Thorne. Marcus Thorne was a former military intelligence operative turned private investigator. 2 years ago, one of my cargo pilots went missing during a questionable layover in Seattle, entangled with a less than reputable local syndicate. Marcus handled the discreet extraction, and I transported his specialized tracking equipment up north, free of charge, for a year. He owed me a substantial favor. My thumbs moved rapidly across the digital keyboard. Target is Nolan, currently riding the SeaTac underground transit toward Concourse B. Tail him. Document every meeting, every handshake, every office building he enters. Blank check. The response illuminated my screen less than 30 seconds later. Received. En route. I pocketed the device, feeling a microscopic shift in the balance of power. The defensive phase of my morning was officially over. Now, I needed to fortify my physical perimeter. The heavy crunch of tires rolling over salted, compacted snow drew my attention to the front window. An oversized, pristine white luxury SUV navigated my driveway, parking haphazardly across the cleared asphalt. The driver's side door swung open, revealing a figure entirely unsuited for the brutal subarctic environment. Elise Stein, my 26-year-old sister-in-law, stepped out into the biting wind. She wore stiletto-heeled boots and a thin designer trench coat, shivering instantly as the -10-degree air hit her unacclimated skin. Elise was a woman who treated employment as a quaint hobby, surviving primarily on the grace of Patricia and her platinum credit cards. Her presence here, unannounced and heavily burdened, was no coincidence. I watched through the frosted glass as she dragged 3 oversized matching leather suitcases from the rear of the vehicle. The wheels caught on the icy driveway, causing her to curse loudly enough to penetrate the insulated windows. She stumbled toward the front porch, her impractical footwear sliding dangerously on the frozen surface. I unlocked the front door just as she reached the top step. "It is a frozen wasteland out here," Elise snapped, pushing past me without a word of greeting. She dragged the heavy luggage over the threshold, letting the salt-covered wheels track gray sludge across my clean hardwood floors. "Your security system is ridiculous, Beverly. Those biometric deadlocks belong on a bank vault, not a residential house. My fingers are frozen stiff trying to punch in the bypass code." "Hello, Elise," I said evenly, closing the heavy oak door to shut out the howling wind. "What brings you up north so suddenly?" She dropped her designer handbag onto the entryway console table, rubbing her arms vigorously. "My boutique in Portland went under. The local economy is a disaster. Nolan told me I could stay in the guest room for a while until I get back on my feet. He said you would not mind the company. It was a brilliantly executed tactical maneuver by the Stein family. They were planting a spy inside my fortress. Patricia and Nolan knew that kicking a supposedly destitute relative out into the freezing cold would paint me as a cruel, heartless spouse, accelerating their narrative that I was losing my grip on reality. They wanted to make me so deeply uncomfortable in my own home that I would surrender the territory voluntarily. Of course, I replied, forcing a tight, accommodating smile. You are always welcome. Good. Because it is freezing in here, she whined, marching toward the digital thermostat on the hallway wall. She began jabbing the upward arrow, trying to force the ambient temperature past 80 degrees. How do you survive in this icebox? I cannot handle this cold. If I do not get some serious heat, I am going to perish. I stood quietly in the foyer, observing her frantic, shivering movements. Elise demanded tropical comfort while standing in the middle of a subarctic winter. She lacked the resilience, the foresight, and the basic survival instincts required to navigate this harsh territory. She viewed the environment as an inconvenience to be complained about, rather than a lethal force to be respected. I will show you to the guest quarters, I offered, smoothly. I picked up one of her heavy suitcases. As I led her down the corridor, a quiet, dangerous calm settled over me. The Stein family had sent a fragile, pampered scout into a blizzard, expecting her to gather intelligence. They failed to realize that the Alaskan winter devours weakness, and I was more than willing to let the cold do its work. Elise dragged the last of her oversized leather suitcases down the east corridor, the wheels catching stubbornly on the reclaimed pine floorboards. I followed quietly, a few steps behind, observing the sheer volume of baggage she deemed necessary for an indefinite stay in Anchorage. She did not cast a single glance toward the expansive frosted window framing the frozen inlet outside. Her attention was entirely consumed by the thread count of the guest bed linens and the tragic lack of a flat-screen television mounted on the wall. Elise viewed existence as a luxury cruise where everyone else served as the custodial staff. She had spent her entire adult life bouncing between vanity projects funded by Patricia and her platinum credit cards. A holistic wellness blog in Seattle, a designer pet bakery in San Francisco, a boutique in Portland. Each venture collapsed within months, sending her retreating back to the family estate. She possessed zero practical survival skills and viewed manual labor with deep suspicion. This made her the perfect pawn for her mother and brother. They dispatched her into my home to gather intelligence, assuming her sheer entitlement and endless complaining would shatter my resolve and force me to abandon the property. Instead of demanding she leave, I played the role of the gracious host. I fetched her extra woven blankets. I showed her how to operate the espresso machine in the kitchen. I smiled tightly through her complaints about the dry subarctic air ruining her skin regimen. I wanted her to feel incredibly comfortable. A comfortable spy is a careless spy. Once Elise barricaded herself in the guest suite to unpack her countless cashmere sweaters, I retreated to my master bedroom. I needed to construct a narrative. If the Stein family wanted to prove I was mentally unfit to run Northern Reach Logistics, I was going to hand them the exact evidence they craved. In wilderness survival and intelligence operations alike, you never confront an enemy scout directly. You feed them tailored disinformation and watch them carry it straight back to their commanding officer. I rummaged through my heavy oak desk drawer and pulled out a plain moleskin notebook I had purchased years ago but never used. I grabbed a cheap ballpoint pen, the kind that blots and skips if you write too fast. I sat on the edge of my mattress and began to write. I did not use my usual crisp block lettering. I intentionally loosened my grip, allowing my handwriting to become slanted, erratic, and frantic. I crafted a fake therapy journal. The first entry, dated 2 weeks prior, detailed a fabricated panic attack. I wrote about waking up in cold sweats, terrified that the logistics company was spiraling toward bankruptcy. I described phantom chest pains and a profound inability to focus on daily tasks. The second entry escalated the illusion. I scribbled paragraphs about feeling detached from reality, claiming that the pressure of managing the freight routes was crushing my sanity. I wrote that I was making dangerous mistakes with the cargo manifests, errors that could cost my pilots their lives during treacherous winter flights. I peppered the pages with crossed-out words, jagged underlining, and tear-shaped water drops I created by flicking a wet fingertip over the fresh ink. The final entry, dated that very morning, was a masterpiece of manufactured despair. I stated that I felt Nolan was slipping away because of my erratic behavior. I wrote that I was deeply terrified of losing my mind and dragging the family reputation down with me. It was a pathetic, fragile portrait of a woman standing on the edge of a psychological cliff. It was exactly what Patricia needed to justify a hostile corporate takeover based on medical incompetency. I left the notebook resting on my nightstand, positioned slightly askew, with the pen marking the most damning page. It looked like I had dropped it in a hurry after a weeping session. Next, I needed to ensure the bait was taken. In my line of work, monitoring secure freight warehouses taught me a great deal about surveillance. I kept a small arsenal of discrete wireless cameras in my basement workshop tools, normally used to monitor blind spots on the loading docks. I selected a lens no larger than a coat button. I mounted it inside the slatted vent of the central heating duct directly above my bedroom door, angling the sensor downward to capture the nightstand and the hallway threshold. I synced the camera feed to a secure application on my smartphone. The high-definition night vision kicked in, rendering my empty bedroom in crisp monochrome. The trap was set. I walked back down the hall and knocked lightly on the guest room door. I told Elise I had to review some boring tax documents in the basement office and would be down there for the rest of the evening. I instructed her to make herself at home and help herself to anything in the kitchen. Then I descended the stairs, locked the basement door behind me, and sat in the dark. Outside, the Alaskan wind howled, rattling the frosted window panes. Inside the concrete walls of the basement, the silence was heavy. I watched my phone screen. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The camera relayed a static image of my quiet bedroom. Then, shortly after 9 o'clock, a shadow slipped across the threshold. Elise crept into the frame. She wore expensive silk pajamas and carried her glowing smartphone. She paused by the door, listening intently for any sound from the basement stairs, before moving with surprising speed toward my side of the bed. Her eyes locked onto the moleskin notebook. I watched through the digital feed as she picked up the journal. She opened the cover, her eyes scanning the erratic handwriting. Even in the grainy night vision footage, I could see the cruel delight spreading across her face. Her shoulders shook with silent laughter. She did not hesitate. Elise held the notebook open with one hand and raised her phone with the other. The camera flash fired repeatedly, illuminating the dark room with stark white bursts of light. She photographed every single page, capturing my fabricated mental breakdown in high resolution. When she finished, she placed the notebook back on the nightstand, taking a moment to ensure it rested at the exact crooked angle she had found it. Instead of leaving the room, Elise retreated to the corner near my closet, ensuring she was far away from the hallway to muffle her voice. She tapped a contact on her screen and pressed the phone to her ear. The hidden camera featured a highly sensitive microphone designed to pick up whispers across a warehouse floor. The audio feed crackled to life in my earpiece. "Mom, you are never going to believe what I just found," Elise whispered, her voice buzzing with triumphant energy. I could hear Patricia's muffled, tinny response through the phone speaker. "What is it, darling? Did you find the bank statements?" "Better," Elise replied. "I am standing in her bedroom. She left her personal diary right on the nightstand. Mom, she is cracking up. She is totally losing her mind. She wrote all this stuff about having panic attacks and screwing up the business routes. She admits she cannot handle the pressure anymore." A sharp, Delighted gasp echoed from Patricia. Do you have pictures? I got everything, Elise boasted, shifting her weight from foot to foot. I will email them to Nolan right now. This is exactly what he needs for the investor meeting. She is handing us the entire company on a silver platter. We can prove she is medically unfit to manage the logistics contracts. You did wonderfully, Elise, Patricia cooed, her tone dripping with venomous pride. Send the files. Just keep playing the sweet, supportive sister. Let her think she is safe. We will have her out of that house and locked away in a wellness facility before the first snowfall of December. I will. This place is a frozen nightmare anyway. The sooner we liquidate this ugly cabin, the better. Elise ended the call and flashed a smug smile at the empty room and padded back out into the hallway, oblivious to the glowing red recording dot hidden in the ceiling vent. Sitting in the cold basement, I terminated the live feed. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. They took the bait perfectly. By feeding them this manufactured vulnerability, I guaranteed they would march into their endgame blinded by their own arrogance. They thought they were hunting a wounded animal, which meant they would stop checking their own perimeter. They would become sloppy. I had the timeline. I had their spy neutralized. I had secured my liquid capital. Now I needed to dissect the legal trap they had engineered to steal my most valuable physical asset. I unlocked my secure photo vault on my phone and pulled up the images I had captured earlier that morning from Nolan's hidden bear-proof safe. I swiped past the offshore ledgers and the forged power of attorney until I reached a heavily worded commercial document. It was a property lien. I pinched the screen, zooming in on the fine print, and felt my pulse steady as the true scope of their financial snare came into sharp, terrifying focus. The concrete walls of my basement office radiated a steady, biting chill, but I barely registered the freezing temperature pressing against my skin. The glow of my smartphone screen provided the only illumination in the dark, silent space. I sat at my grandfather's old wooden drafting table, scrolling through the encrypted photo vault containing the images I had captured earlier from the bear-proof safe. I swiped past the offshore wire transfer ledgers. I ignored the fraudulent power of attorney draft. My thumb hovered over a thick, multi-page commercial document. The header at the top of the screen read, Promissory Note and Security Agreement. I pinched the glass screen to magnify the fine print, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. The lender was not a traditional Alaskan commercial bank. It was a boutique equity firm based out of Seattle, a predatory institution known for issuing high-interest mezzanine debt to desperate developers. I read the principal loan amount printed in bold black numbers. $3 million. My breath caught in my throat, forming a faint, transient cloud in the frigid basement air. I dragged my finger across the screen to locate the collateral section. A loan of that magnitude required a substantial physical asset to secure the financing. There it was, spelled out in harsh, undeniable typography. Parcel 42, Industrial Zoning District, Downtown Anchorage. That was not just a random plot of commercial real estate. That was the primary aviation warehouse and maintenance hangar for Northern Reach Logistics. My grandfather Elias purchased that specific acreage 4 decades ago, when the district was nothing but frozen mud and resilient scrub brush. He poured the massive concrete foundation himself, braving relentless subarctic sleet storms to erect the towering steel arches of the main hangar. I grew up inhaling the distinct, intoxicating scent of engine grease, spruce pine, and aviation fuel within those corrugated metal walls. That building was the beating heart of my freight network. It housed the spare turbine engines, the specialized de-icing equipment, and the central dispatch terminal, where my team coordinated every flight. Without that facility, my bush planes had nowhere to land for repairs, nowhere to load cargo, and no way to operate. The company would cease to exist overnight. Nolan and Patricia had leveraged my family heritage to secure a predatory loan. The structure of the agreement was brilliantly designed for failure. The interest rates were astronomical, scheduled to balloon into unmanageable payments within 90 days. They never intended to repay a single dime to the Seattle firm. Their plan was exquisite in its cruelty. They would take the $3 million, funnel it directly into the Cayman Islands holding company, and let the equity firm foreclose on the warehouse. The bank would seize my grandfather's legacy, liquidate the physical assets, and leave me holding the ashes of a ruined enterprise. I swiped to the final page of the digital document, bringing the signature line into sharp focus. My name sat proudly above the dotted line. Beverly Stein. I studied the loops and slants of the cursive script. It was a spectacular imitation of my handwriting. The forger had captured the slight leftward tilt of my capital letters and the trailing, hurried finish of my last name. To a casual observer, or a busy corporate loan officer eager to close a lucrative deal, the signature looked entirely authentic. But surviving in the aviation logistics trade requires an obsessive attention to microscopic details. A hairline fracture in a propeller blade can bring down a twin-engine aircraft in the middle of a frozen tundra. You must train your eyes to spot the tiny anomalies that others ignore. I zoomed in further, pushing the digital image to its maximum resolution. The pixels blurred slightly at the edges, but the physical texture of the ink stroke remained highly distinct. The signature possessed a subtle, uneven groove pressed into the paper. The ink pooled slightly at the sharp curves, leaving a fainter, thinner trail on the upward strokes. This specific physical characteristic only occurs when a writer uses a traditional ballpoint pen, which requires firm downward pressure to roll the tiny metallic sphere across the coarse paper fibers. I do not use ballpoint pens for legal documents. I despise the way they write. For the past decade, I have exclusively signed every seasonal contract payroll check and flight manifest with a heavy black felt tip marker. The felt tip glides smoothly over the page, leaving a uniform, flat ribbon of ink that permeates the paper, rather than indenting it. The signature glaring back at me on the screen sat on the surface, pressed deep into the page by a hard, rolling ball. Then I looked at the color of the ink. Even under the harsh, artificial glare of my smartphone camera flash, the ink was a distinct, vibrant azure blue. My mind snapped back to the tense confrontation in my home office earlier that morning. I pictured Patricia standing over my mahogany desk, wearing her dripping mink coat. I remembered her reaching into her stiff designer handbag to retrieve a writing instrument so she could leave a useless sticky note on my monitor. A thick, brushed silver barrel, a heavy, weighted balance, and a tip that produced a deep, vibrant blue ink. The puzzle pieces locked together with a sickening, terrifying clarity. The matriarch of the Anchorage socialite scene did not hire a back-alley forger to execute her grand theft. Patricia committed the felony with her own manicured hands. She sat in her pristine, climate-controlled estate, gripped her custom silver pen, and meticulously traced my name over and over until she perfected the imitation. She personally signed away my grandfather's warehouse, confident that her immense wealth and social status shielded her from any potential scrutiny. A dangerous, quiet thrill chased away the lingering dread in my chest. Patricia had inserted herself directly into the chain of evidence. She crossed the line from a conspiring observer to the primary perpetrator of federal fraud. I placed my phone on the drafting table and reached underneath the wooden surface, pressing the power button on an old, heavy-duty laser printer I kept in the basement for redundant hard copies. The machine whined to life, the internal rollers spinning with a loud mechanical hum that masked the sound of the wind outside. Digital files could be hacked, corrupted, or mysteriously deleted by high-priced corporate saboteurs. I needed undeniable physical proof. I needed a paper trail so robust that no defense attorney could dismantle it in a courtroom. I connected my phone to the local printer network. I selected the forged property lien, the Cayman Islands routing ledgers, and the false power of attorney. I hit print. The machine churned out page after page of warm, crisp paper. I gathered the documents, my eyes scanning the physical copies to ensure every damning detail translated perfectly from the digital screen. The blue ink of Patricia's forgery stood out like a beacon of guilt. I placed the stack into a thick, waterproof folder. Next, I printed the notification log, showing the exact time Elise transmitted her photographs of my fake therapy journal to Patricia. I added the screenshots of my locked banking application, creating a timeline of their coordinated attack. I was building a war dossier. Nolan and Patricia operated under the assumption that I was a fragile, overworked spouse, blind to their machinations. They relied on speed deception and my supposed emotional instability. But they failed to account for my meticulous nature. They left glaring fingerprints all over their crime scene. I locked the waterproof folder inside a fireproof lockbox hidden behind a stack of obsolete aviation manuals. I checked the luminescent dial of my wristwatch. It was approaching 11 at night. The house above me was completely silent. Elise was likely asleep in the warm guest quarters, dreaming of her impending payday. Nolan was asleep in a luxury hotel down in Seattle, dreaming of his new offshore fortune. I leaned back in my wooden chair, letting the adrenaline metabolize into a state of cold, sharp focus. I had the financial evidence. I had the timeline. I knew exactly how they planned to strip me of my wealth and my sanity. But the puzzle was not yet complete. If Nolan intended to present his fabricated case to my investors and orchestrate a hostile takeover of Northern Reach Logistics, he needed access to my proprietary client database. He needed the seasonal routing algorithms, the vendor contact lists, and the confidential pricing structures stored on the central servers at my downtown headquarters. Without that data, he could not promise the board of directors a seamless transition of power. He would need to extract that information before the divorce petition went public. My phone vibrated against the drafting table, the sudden noise cutting through the quiet basement. It was not a text message from my private investigator in Seattle. It was not a movement alert from the hidden camera positioned upstairs. The screen glowed with a harsh, pulsing red banner. It was an automated intrusion alert generated by the central firewalls at Northern Reach Logistics. System warning. Unauthorized physical login attempt detected at main server terminal. Someone was currently standing inside my dark, empty downtown office building, trying to bypass the primary security protocols to access the core database. The physical threat had shifted. The enemy was no longer just attacking my bank accounts or monitoring my bedroom. They were inside the beating heart of my enterprise, attempting to steal the very maps that kept my planes in the sky. I grabbed my heavy winter parka from the coat hook, shoved the phone into my pocket, and headed for the basement exit leading directly to the garage. The temperature inside the unheated garage was brutal, but the fire igniting in my veins provided all the heat I needed. I was going to catch the rat in the server room. The engine of my heavy-duty truck roared to life, filling the unheated garage with the sharp scent of exhaust. I shifted into reverse and backed out into the unforgiving Alaskan night. The digital thermometer on my dashboard displayed negative 14 degrees. A bitter crosswind swept off the inlet, dragging fine sheets of ice across the empty suburban streets. Anchorage at midnight during the winter resembles a ghost town. The sensible residents are asleep under heavy down comforters. The predators are out hunting. My tires gripped the hard-packed snow as I navigated the winding roads toward the downtown commercial district. The heater blasted warm air against my face, yet my focus remained locked on the red intrusion alert, still pulsing on my phone, resting in the passenger seat. Someone was standing inside the nerve center of Northern Reach Logistics, actively attempting to dismantle the digital architecture of my freight network. I did not speed. Getting pulled over by local law enforcement or sliding into a frozen snowbank would only grant the intruder more time. I drove with steady, calculated precision. I traced the route past dormant strip malls and dimly lit intersections until the brutalist concrete facade of my headquarters loomed into view. I bypassed the illuminated main parking lot and turned down the narrow back alley. I parked the truck behind a row of frozen dumpsters, concealing the vehicle from the street. Stepping out into the biting wind, I zipped my insulated parka tight against my neck. I approached the rear service entrance. This door bypassed the front lobby security desk, leading directly to the freight elevator and the fire stairs. I pressed my master biometric fob against the scanner. A muted green light flashed. The heavy steel door clicked open. The interior of the building was dark lit only by the faint amber glow of emergency exit signs. I chose the stairwell. Elevators hum and ding announcing your arrival. Concrete stairs offer a silent ascent if you know where to place your boots. I climbed 3 flights, my breathing slow and controlled. I reached the executive floor, easing the heavy fire door open to peek down the main corridor. At the far end of the hall, a faint, bluish light spilled from the server room. The door was propped open a mere fraction of an inch, just enough to snake a rogue Ethernet cable through the gap if necessary. I walked down the carpeted hallway, placing each step near the wall to avoid creaking floorboards. I reached the server room and peered through the narrow sliver of glass embedded in the door. Standing bathed in the harsh glow of the primary terminal monitor was Derek. Derek was Nolan's sycophantic executive assistant. He was a 24-year-old aspiring corporate climber who spent his days fetching my husband dry cleaning, nodding enthusiastically during meetings, and mimicking Nolan's choice of expensive neckties. He was a soft, pampered kid who belonged in a climate-controlled boardroom, not standing in an Anchorage server farm at midnight committing a federal felony. His hands flew frantically across the illuminated keyboard. He kept glancing nervously over his shoulder, his slicked-back hair disheveled and damp with sweat despite the ambient chill of the building. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and opened the camera application. I hit record. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the room. The mechanical hum of the towering server racks filled the space, a constant, droning vibration designed to keep the processors from melting down. Before Derek could even register my presence, I reached behind me and engaged the heavy brass deadbolt. The lock slid into place with a sharp, echoing crack. Derek spun around. The color drained from his face so fast he looked translucent. His eyes darted from my face to the locked door, then down to the phone in my hand, its red recording icon blinking steadily. "Hello, Derek," I said. My voice was low, carrying no anger, only an icy certainty. "Beverly," he stammered, taking a step back until his shoulders bumped against the humming metal rack. "I can explain this. Nolan asked me to run a diagnostic check on the routing software. We thought there was a glitch in the seasonal contracts." "You are sweating, Derek," I observed, keeping the camera lens centered firmly on his terrified face. "And you are bypassing the primary firewall using a brute force script you downloaded onto that flash drive plugged into port 4. A diagnostic check requires an authorized login. You are attempting a hard wipe of the central client database." His mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. The harsh contrast of the room became profound. The servers hummed with steady, rhythmic power, while Derek drew short, ragged, terrified breaths that echoed off the concrete walls. I took one step closer. "Let us talk about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, Title 18 of the United States Code. Accessing a protected commercial server to cause intentional damage carries a federal minimum sentence of 10 years. If the prosecution proves the act was designed to orchestrate corporate sabotage, that sentence jumps to 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary." "I am just doing my job," he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the impending consequences. "Your job is picking up Nolan's coffee," I corrected smoothly. "Your job is not risking 2 decades of your life to help my husband steal my company. Who ordered the data wipe?" He swallowed hard, his eyes wide with genuine panic. Nolan told me to. Do not lie to me while I am holding the camera, Derek. Nolan is standing in the Seattle airport. He lacks the technical foresight to orchestrate a brute force server attack. This has Patricia written all over it. Derek crumbled. The meager loyalty he held for the Stein family evaporated the moment he faced actual ruin. He squeezed his eyes shut and nodded rapidly. It was Patricia, he confessed, his words spilling out in a rushed, frantic torrent. She called me yesterday. She said the divorce petition was being drafted. She needed the logistics company valuation to tank before the initial court filings. If the seasonal routing algorithms and the vendor contact list disappeared, the business would look insolvent on paper. The judge would award her son the remaining liquid assets, and you would be left with a worthless empty shell. The sheer vindictive brilliance of the plan was staggering. Patricia wanted to salt the earth so nothing could ever grow again. She promised me a promotion, Derek pleaded, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. She said if I wiped the database, Nolan would make me the vice president of regional operations once he took over the restructured holding company. Please, Beverly, I cannot go to prison. I just got engaged. I lowered the phone slightly, maintaining the recording, but shifting my gaze directly into his eyes. Patricia views you as an expendable asset. If the authorities trace this breach, she will deny ever speaking to you. You will take the fall alone, and she will hire a new assistant by Friday. What do I do? He begged, his hands shaking visibly in the blue light of the monitors. I pointed to the silver flash drive sticking out of the terminal port. Pull that out. Derek hastily reached forward and yanked the drive from the slot. Now hand it to me, I instructed. He held it out, his palm slick with perspiration. I took the metal drive, slipping it into the warm pocket of my parka. Is that the script Patricia gave you to run? I asked. Yes, he answered quickly. But there is something else on there. To prove she was serious about the promotion, she forwarded me her entire email archive detailing the restructuring plan. She wanted me to see the organizational charts, so I knew my new title was guaranteed. Every correspondence she had with the offshore attorneys and the investors is saved in a subfolder on that drive. She told me to study it so I would be ready for the transition. Patricia's arrogance had just handed me the final weapon I needed. She trusted a weak, ambitious kid with the blueprints to her conspiracy. I reached behind me and unlocked the deadbolt. The heavy door swung open, revealing the dark, quiet hallway. You are going to walk out of this building, Derek, I commanded. You will not return to this office. You will not answer any phone calls from Nolan or Patricia. You will go home, pack a bag, and disappear until this dust settles. If you warn them, if you breathe a single word of this confrontation to anyone in the Stein family, I will deliver this video directly to the federal prosecutor before sunrise. Do we have an understanding? Yes, he gasped, nodding frantically. Yes, thank you. I swear I will not say a word. He darted past me, leaving his expensive wool overcoat draped over a nearby chair in his haste to escape. I listened to his frantic footsteps echo down the corridor, followed by the heavy slam of the stairwell door. I let him run out into the freezing subarctic night, knowing the bitter cold would serve as a sharp reminder of the mercy I had just granted him. I knew exactly how I would deal with Derek later, but for now, his cowardly retreat served my purposes perfectly. I stood alone in the humming server room. The digital architecture of my freight network remained intact. The crisis was averted. But the silver drive resting in my pocket felt heavy with unread secrets. I needed to know exactly what Patricia had been telling my investors. I pulled my laptop from my backpack, set it on the metal terminal desk, and plugged the flash drive into the side port. The screen flickered, revealing the directory of stolen emails. I opened the first message in the archive, and the words staring back at me promised a battle far uglier than a simple corporate theft. The server room hummed around me, a chorus of cooling fans pushing chilled air across towers of blinking data nodes. I carried my laptop out of the freezing corridor and into the adjacent dispatch office, a Spartan room featuring a single steel desk and a panoramic window overlooking the frozen Anchorage harbor. I sat in the dark, allowing the ambient light from the distant street lamps to cast long, distorted shadows against the drywall. I retrieved the silver flash drive from my parka pocket. The small metal device felt remarkably dense, laden with the digital poison Patricia intended to use against my enterprise. I inserted the drive into the side port of my machine. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh, bluish glare. I navigated to the directory Derek had surrendered. A master folder labeled Restructuring Archive sat waiting on the desktop. I clicked it open, revealing hundreds of archived email threads. I organized the messages by date, starting with communications sent 6 weeks prior. The recipient list read like a roster of my most crucial financial backers: private equity partners in Seattle, regional logistics coordinators in Vancouver, state infrastructure grant directors. I opened a thread addressed to Marcus Vance, my lead venture capitalist. The subject line read, "Confidential update regarding Northern Reach leadership." My eyes tracked across the paragraphs, absorbing the surgical precision of my mother-in-law's prose. Patricia did not write with overt hostility. She masked her venom behind a thick veneer of maternal concern. She claimed she was reaching out privately to protect the stakeholders from impending volatility. She wove a fabricated narrative detailing my supposed psychological decline, stating that I had recently been diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder. She described fictional episodes of mania, claiming I was making reckless financial decisions without consulting my husband. She detailed profound depressive crashes that allegedly kept me confined to my bed for days, unable to answer urgent operational phone calls. The audacity of the fabrication forced the breath from my lungs. I clicked through subsequent emails, watching the manufactured poison spread through my professional network. Patricia expertly planted seeds of doubt, asking the investors to remain patient while Nolan supposedly managed my volatile mood swings and kept the freight network afloat. But the most devastating revelation awaited me in a chain marked high priority. It involved the Apex Touring Corporation. 2 weeks ago, Apex abruptly canceled a lucrative summer freight contract. That specific deal guaranteed a steady influx of capital during the slower spring thaw months, securing specialized transport for heavy mining equipment and seismic sensors across the Yukon Territory. The cancellation hit our quarterly projections hard, and the Apex representatives offered only vague excuses about restructuring their internal supply lines. Now the unfiltered truth glowed on my monitor. I read an email Patricia sent directly to the Apex executive vice president. She advised the executive to sever ties with Northern Reach Logistics immediately. She cited my deteriorating mental condition, explicitly stating that my erratic behavior posed a severe liability to their high-value cargo. She instructed the executive to cite corporate budget shifts upon cancellation, ensuring they avoided triggering any legal retaliation or breach of contract penalties from my attorneys. Patricia single-handedly torched the most profitable seasonal agreement on my ledger, intentionally bleeding my company dry to manufacture a financial crisis. The architecture of their conspiracy crystallized into a horrifying, brilliant picture. The frozen corporate accounts the entitled squatter placed in my guest room, the forged commercial property lien securing a predatory loan. These were not isolated, opportunistic attacks. They formed a comprehensive, calculated siege designed to culminate at the upcoming quarterly investor meeting. Nolan intended to walk into that boardroom and project a narrative of catastrophic failure. He would present the lost Apex touring contract as undeniable proof that the enterprise was hemorrhaging capital under my chaotic leadership. He would display the fake therapy journal Elise photographed tonight, corroborating Patricia's whispers of my psychological collapse. Nolan planned to play the tragic, dutiful husband, reluctantly asking the board of directors to remove me from my position as chief executive officer to save their equity from total ruin. But stealing the logistics company was merely a secondary objective. I opened a document attached to a message sent to a high-priced probate lawyer based in Washington state. The file contained legal parameters for establishing a permanent adult conservatorship. The ambient chill of the dispatch office seeped deep into my bones. They did not just want my wealth. They wanted to legally declare me an unfit individual. They intended to strip away my fundamental autonomy, placing Nolan in a position of total power of attorney over my health care, my financial decisions, and my physical freedom. They meant to reduce me to a ward of the state, locking me away in some discreet, high-end psychiatric facility while they carved up my grandfather's legacy and spent my fortune. I stared at the glowing pixels detailing my impending legal subjugation. A deep, primal coldness radiated from my core, freezing any residual affection I might have harbored for the man I married. 6 years of shared meals, whispered secrets in the dark, and holiday gatherings vanished into the frigid Anchorage night. Nolan had slept beside me, kissed my cheek, and praised my resilience, all while drafting the legal framework to erase my existence. The precision of their cruelty took my breath away. This level of deception required months of careful sociopathic dedication. I stood up from the steel desk, needing to feel the solid ground beneath my boots. I paced the length of the dispatch office. Through the panoramic window, the frozen expanse of the harbor reflected the pale moonlight. The ice out there was thick, unyielding, and treacherous. To survive in this environment, one must become tougher than the elements. My grandfather built this freight empire by staring down sub-zero gales and refusing to blink. He passed that exact genetic fortitude down to me. The Stein family mistook my polite demeanor for weakness. They mistook my quiet accommodation for fragility. They assumed because I preferred quiet evenings over their loud society galas, I lacked the fangs required to defend my territory. I walked back to the laptop. I copied the entire email directory, the conservatorship blueprints, and the Apex touring correspondence onto a secure cloud drive. I then duplicated the files onto a secondary encrypted storage device hidden inside a hollow compartment in my boot heel. I removed Derek's silver flash drive and slipped it back into my parka. The digital armory I possessed was now lethal. I held the forged collateral documents, the Cayman routing numbers, the time-stamped footage of Elise stealing the fake journal, the video of Derek confessing to the server attack, and Patricia's own written correspondence detailing the character assassination. I shut down the computer. The dispatch office plunged back into darkness. I retraced my steps down the fire stairwell, exiting through the rear service door. The biting wind whipped across the alley, stinging my cheeks, but I welcomed the sharp sensation. It kept my mind razor sharp. I climbed into my truck, the engine roaring to life, and pointed the headlights toward my suburban fortress. By the time I parked in my driveway, the eastern horizon displayed the faintest hint of bruised purple dawn. The pristine luxury vehicle belonging to my sister-in-law still sat haphazardly across the asphalt, dusted in a fresh layer of frost. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside the heated foyer. The silence of the house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was an active battlefield. I shed my heavy parka and walked into the kitchen to brew a pot of strong, black coffee. I needed the caffeine to sharpen my focus for the incoming daylight hours. As the dark liquid dripped into the glass carafe, my mind plotted the next tactical maneuver. I had fed them the fake diary. I had secured my business data. Now I needed to wait for their next offensive strike, ensuring they remained confident in their impending victory. I poured a steaming mug and leaned against the granite island counter. The sun crested the Chugach Mountains, casting long, golden shadows across the frost-rimmed windows. The stage was perfectly set. Nolan believed his geographic alibi held firm. Patricia believed her emails remained a secret. Elise believed she had secured the ultimate blackmail material. They were walking blindly into an ambush of catastrophic proportions. My smartphone vibrated on the countertop, shattering the morning quiet. The caller identification displayed Nolan's contact portrait, a charming, smiling photograph taken during a summer sailing trip. He was calling to execute the next phase of his psychological warfare, ready to gaslight me into surrendering my crown. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, let a convincing tremor slip into my throat, and pressed the green button to accept the incoming assault. The green icon on the glass screen pulsed, waiting for my touch. I pressed it to accept the incoming assault. Nolan greeted me with a voice so heavily coated in artificial warmth it made my stomach churn. That initial morning conversation was brief, merely a prelude to the main event. He claimed he was stepping into a busy seminar session and would call back when he had more time to truly talk. I spent the remainder of the daylight hours organizing the digital arsenal I had stolen from the downtown servers, securing every file within encrypted folders hidden deep inside my personal network. By the time the sun dipped below the rugged mountain peaks, casting the suburban landscape in deep subarctic shadows, my device vibrated once again. This time the trap was fully baited and ready to snap shut. "Hello," I answered, ensuring my tone carried a subtle weary rasp. "Hi, sweetheart," Nolan murmured. The audio quality was incredibly crisp, expertly masking the bustling Seattle transit hub he had occupied earlier that day. "I just wrapped up my meetings. I have been thinking about you all day. How are you holding up?" "I am managing," I replied, allowing a heavy sigh to escape my lips. I stood near the granite kitchen island, staring outward into the freezing night. The dark glass of the window pane acted as a mirror against the unlit room, reflecting my silhouette perfectly. I looked tired, an authentic physical reaction to operating on zero sleep, which served my performance brilliantly. "Beverly, I received an unprompted email from the executive vice president at Apex Touring," Nolan said softly. His voice dripped with weaponized concern, perfectly calibrated to sound like a supportive partner navigating a sudden tragedy. "They informed me about the summer freight cancellation, honey. That represents a massive portion of the seasonal revenue. I am so deeply sorry." He was a spectacular actor. If I had not read the emails orchestrating that exact cancellation, I might have found comfort in his gentle reassurance. Instead, I recognized the precise moment he initiated the psychological warfare. "It caught me entirely off guard," I whispered, injecting a convincing tremor into my vocal cords. "I do not understand why they pulled out of the agreement. We have maintained a flawless safety record with their heavy equipment for 3 years. I feel like everything is slipping through my fingers." "You cannot blame yourself," he cooed, reeling in the line with practiced ease. "But we need to be honest about the situation. You have been carrying an impossible burden for years. The logistics enterprise requires relentless energy, and lately, you have seemed incredibly overwhelmed by the daily operations. I worry about the toll this intense stress is taking on your health." I watched my reflection in the window glass. Behind my mirrored image, a faint shadow shifted in the hallway corridor. Elise had emerged from the luxurious guest quarters. She stood just outside the kitchen threshold, pressing her back against the drywall, eavesdropping on the private conversation. A smug, triumphant grin stretched across her pampered face. She believed she was witnessing the final collapse of my sanity, unaware that I could see her reflection clearly in the dark glass. "I just need to work harder," I protested weakly, playing the part of a stubborn but failing corporate leader. "I can fix the budget deficit. I can find a replacement client to fill the void." "Beverly, stop, Nolan," urged his tone, shifting into a firm but loving register. "You need to stop pushing yourself toward a complete breakdown. Your mental well-being is far more important than any freight schedule. I have been doing some extensive research, and I found a beautiful wellness retreat located in the serene mountains of Washington state. It is a highly respected facility specializing in executive burnout and severe stress management. I truly believe a few months of guided rest away from the frozen north would restore your spirit. A wellness retreat. The euphemism was chilling. He was not suggesting a luxury spa vacation. He was laying the groundwork to commit me to an inpatient psychiatric facility, physically removing me from my territory, while he assumed total control of my assets and bank accounts. A few months, I echoed, my voice shaking authentically at the audacity of his proposal. I cannot just abandon the dispatch center for an entire season. I will step in, Nolan offered smoothly, the venom hidden beneath a layer of honey. I will manage the administrative duties, handle the payroll processing, and keep the cargo pilots flying. You need to focus entirely on healing your mind. Please, honey, do this for our marriage. Let me carry the heavy weight for a while. I close my eyes, summoning a ragged, uneven breath to feed through the microphone. I have been feeling the pressure, Nolan. It feels like the walls are closing in on me. Maybe you are right. Maybe I do need to step away and seek professional help. We will figure it all out together, he promised, his voice swelling with triumphant relief. I will handle all the arrangements. Just try to get some sleep tonight. We exchanged quiet farewells, and the line went dead. In the hallway, Elise clapped her hands together in a silent, gleeful celebration before retreating back to her room to text her mother the excellent news. I lowered the phone from my ear. The fragile, weeping wife vanished, instantly replaced by a cold, calculating architect. They were executing their playbook flawlessly. The gaslighting was meant to break my confidence, forcing me to voluntarily surrender the keys to my kingdom. They needed a documented history of mental instability to present to a judge for the conservatorship proceedings. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. A private courier stood on the frost-covered porch holding a stiff cardboard envelope. I signed the digital manifest and carried the package into the bright kitchen. The return address belonged to an elite behavioral health institute located in an affluent Seattle suburb. I broke the seal and extracted a thick, watermarked invoice. It was a billing statement detailing a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, complete with diagnostic codes referencing severe bipolar depression and acute paranoid delusions. The total charge amounted to $4,000. The document claimed the consultation occurred virtually 3 days prior. I stared at the fraudulent medical bill. The Stein family was manufacturing a fictitious paper trail to legally substantiate their claims. They had clearly bribed a corrupt physician within their elite social circle to generate this official paperwork. When Nolan eventually presented his hostile takeover proposal to the investors, he would point to this very invoice as undeniable proof that I was actively seeking high-level psychiatric care for a debilitating mental illness. They were weaving a net of lies so dense they believed escape was impossible. I did not shred the terrifying document. I carried it down to the unheated basement and locked it inside the waterproof dossier alongside the forged commercial property lien and the Cayman Islands routing numbers. Every piece of false evidence they created only strengthened the ultimate trap I was building. Their arrogance blinded them to the fact that manufacturing a medical diagnosis for financial gain constituted profound federal fraud. The board was set. The pieces were moving exactly as I predicted, but I could not execute the final counteroffensive alone. The legal mechanisms required to freeze an offshore trust and invalidate a fraudulent power of attorney demanded a ruthless, specialized professional. I pulled an encrypted burner device from my coat pocket. I navigated to a contact provided to me years ago by a former commercial rival who had survived a vicious corporate sabotage attempt. I typed a brief, coded message requesting an immediate consultation regarding hostile asset seizure and forged legal credentials. I hit send, the digital transmission flying into the frigid subarctic night. Within minutes, the screen illuminated with a location and a time for the following morning. The rendezvous point was a gritty, unglamorous diner situated on the industrial outskirts of Anchorage, far removed from Patricia and her elite social circles. I smiled, feeling the adrenaline flood my veins. The defense phase was officially over, and the preparations for a brutal legal slaughter were about to commence. The Northern Star Diner sat on the industrial fringe of Anchorage, a decaying cinder block structure surrounded by frozen shipping containers and forgotten rail yards. The establishment smelled permanently of stale grease, bleached countertops, and burnt dark roast coffee. It was a gritty, unglamorous haven favored by long-haul truckers and night-shift dock workers. It was the exact opposite of the pristine, climate-controlled country clubs where my mother-in-law held court, which made it the perfect location for a clandestine war council. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth near the rear exit. Sitting across from me were the two most ruthless professionals I could find on a Sunday morning. Victor Cross was a cutthroat corporate litigator who treated the judicial system like a blood sport. Beside him sat Elena Rostova, a forensic accountant possessing the unique ability to trace a single hidden dollar through a labyrinth of international shell corporations. I did not hire them to negotiate a peaceful separation. I hired them to engineer a legal slaughter. I unzipped my heavy winter parka and placed the waterproof dossier on the scratched Formica table. Victor opened the clasp, extracting the physical evidence I had gathered over the past 48 hours. He reviewed the forged commercial property lien, his eyes scanning the fraudulent blue ink signature that threatened my grandfather's warehouse. Elena immediately took possession of the offshore wire transfer ledgers and the fabricated behavioral health invoices, entering the data into a secure encrypted terminal on her sleek laptop. While they worked in focused silence, a weary waitress deposited a thick ceramic mug in front of me. I wrapped my freezing hands around the warm porcelain and took a slow sip. The coffee was bitter, resembling warm battery acid, yet it provided a profound sense of comfort. It tasted like unfiltered reality, stripping away the lingering exhaustion of the night. The sharp, abrasive flavor transported me back 2 decades, triggering a vivid memory that anchored my resolve. 60 seconds of the past flooded my mind. I am 14 years old, standing knee-deep in fresh powder just outside the city limits. The subarctic wind bites at my exposed cheeks. My grandfather, Elias, kneels beside a set of fresh tracks pressed into the pristine snow. "Look closely, Beverly," he instructed, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "These are wolf prints. A predator moves with purpose. A predator fights for its territory and protects its pack." He pointed toward a secondary set of scattered, erratic tracks circling the perimeter of the primary trail. But a scavenger just waits in the shadows. A scavenger gets greedy, follows the real hunter, and ultimately falls into a trap because it lacks the discipline to earn its own meal. The memory faded, leaving me sitting in the diner booth with a renewed sense of clarity. Nolan was not a predator. He possessed no instinct for the hunt. He was a scavenger, feeding off the labor I poured into Northern Reach Logistics. He waited until the enterprise was thriving to try and steal the carcass. My gaze drifted past Victor's shoulder, looking through the condensation covering the diner window. A fierce crosswind whipped across the gravel parking lot, kicking up swirling eddies of snow. Through the hazy glass, a dark sedan idled near the edge of the property. The engine exhaust formed a thick white cloud in the negative-degree air. Behind the heavily tinted driver's side window, a subtle metallic glint caught the neon light of the diner sign. It was the distinct reflection of a telephoto camera lens. Nolan had deployed a private investigator to monitor my movements. He wanted visual confirmation that my supposed psychological breakdown was progressing as scheduled. He expected to see a shattered, erratic woman wandering the industrial district. Panic is a useless emotion in the wilderness. I did not flinch. I did not alert Victor or Elena to the surveillance. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved a specific, brightly colored manila folder I had prepared precisely for this scenario. I placed it squarely in the center of the table, angling the cover so the bold black marker lettering faced the window directly. The label read, Divorce Settlement Draft. I tapped the cover, feigning a look of profound weeping defeat for the hidden camera. Let the spy photograph my manufactured surrender. Let Nolan believe I was consulting low-rent attorneys in a dive diner to beg for a meager alimony payout. I smoothly slid the actual forensic dossier underneath the decoy folder, shielding the Cayman Islands routing numbers and the forged property lien from the telephoto lens. By feeding the investigator a tailored red herring, I ensured my husband would march into his endgame, blinded by his own staggering arrogance. Across the table, Elena stopped typing. The rhythmic clacking of her keyboard ceased, replaced by a heavy, charged silence. She looked up, her expression shifting from professional detachment to raw astonishment. She turned her laptop screen toward me, pushing it gently across the table. We have a massive structural anomaly in the financial architecture, Elena announced, her voice a low, urgent whisper. I traced the routing credentials for the Cayman Islands holding entity. The offshore shell is not a joint venture. It does not carry Nolan's name anywhere on the primary ownership ledger. I frowned, studying the complex web of corporate registrations displayed on her monitor. If Nolan is not the registered owner, who is controlling the stolen capital? Elena pointed to the final line of the international registry document. The sole registered proprietor, the exclusive legal beneficiary of the fraudulent shell company, is Patricia Stein. The revelation hit the table with the force of a physical blow. Victor leaned forward, steepling his fingers as the true depth of the betrayal crystallized. He outlined the legal mechanics of the discovery, his voice laced with grim admiration for the sheer ruthlessness of the scheme. Nolan did not simply register the account in his mother's name to hide the money, Victor explained, tapping the screen. He weaponized the incorporation paperwork. By designating Patricia as the sole proprietor of the fraudulent shell, Nolan legally insulated himself from federal prosecution. When the anti-money laundering flags eventually trigger a Department of Justice investigation, the federal subpoenas will demand the registration documents. The paper trail will point exclusively to the Anchorage socialite. I stared at the name on the screen, the pieces of the puzzle snapping together to form a horrifying picture. Nolan was planning to drain the funds through a secondary, untraceable proxy account, leaving his own mother holding the bag for a multi-million-dollar felony. Patricia believed she was orchestrating my destruction alongside her golden child, entirely blind to the fact that her son was engineering her legal execution. The alliance between mother and son was a fragile illusion built on profound greed. We can tear them apart, I stated softly, a dangerous thrill igniting in my chest. If we expose the registration details, they will turn on each other, instantly. Victor snapped his notebook shut, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a courtroom slaughter. I have enough material right now to draft a lethal countersuit and secure an emergency corporate freeze order from an Anchorage judge. I can invalidate the property lien and lock down the remaining logistics capital by noon. Do not file anything yet, I commanded, stopping his hand. Victor looked at me confused. Beverly, if we wait, they might find a way to bypass the federal hold on the wire transfer. If we file the injunctions quietly through the court, they will scatter, I explained, my voice cold and unyielding. Nolan will hire defense attorneys. Patricia will flee to her estate, and they will drag my enterprise through years of quiet, suffocating litigation. I do not want to fight a war of attrition. I want to execute a public, undeniable decapitation of their credibility. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the tactical advantage. To spring the trap effectively, we need Nolan in a room officially on the record, presenting the forged documents and the fake medical history to the board of directors. If he attempts the hostile takeover while we hold the counter evidence, he crosses the threshold of actionable corporate fraud in front of numerous wealthy witnesses. Exactly, I agreed. I want him to lock the boardroom doors and dig his own grave. Victor checked the luminescent dial of his steel wristwatch. The quarterly investor meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning, but the architect of your demise is still supposedly in Juneau. He is in Seattle, I corrected, checking the latest encrypted location update from my own private investigator down south. But his geographic lie is about to expire. He is returning to Anchorage today to finalize his coup and check on his captive wife. I finished the last sip of my bitter coffee, the caffeine and adrenaline fueling a newfound, terrifying energy. I gathered the decoy folder and the hidden evidence, securing them inside my briefcase. The trap was fully constructed, laced with financial tripwires and forged signatures, waiting only for the scavenger to step inside. Nolan's return flight from Seattle was scheduled to touch down in exactly 2 hours. The calm before the storm was officially over. It was time to go home, greet my traitorous husband with open arms, and prepare for the midnight confrontation that would alter the trajectory of our lives forever. I stood in the center of the kitchen, listening to the sharp sizzle of the cast-iron skillet. A thick fillet of wild Alaskan salmon rested in the pan, bathing in melted butter and crushed garlic. The rich, savory aroma filled the warm house, offering a stark contrast to the bitter subarctic wind rattling the frost-rimmed windows. I pressed a flat metal spatula against the fish, watching the skin crisp into a perfect golden crust. I was preparing a homecoming feast for a traitor. The front door chimed, followed by the heavy thud of leather boots striking the entryway rug. I wiped my hands on a linen towel and turned just as Nolan walked into the kitchen. He looked immaculate. His tailored wool overcoat hung perfectly across his broad shoulders, and his dark hair remained impeccably styled despite the brutal weather outside. In his left hand he carried a sprawling bouquet of imported pink peonies. The vibrant flowers were a rare, expensive luxury in Anchorage during the dead of winter. A calculated prop designed to project the image of a devoted, loving husband. He closed the distance between us, wrapping his free arm around my waist and pressing a warm kiss against my cheek. The familiar, distinct scent of his expensive cedarwood cologne washed over me. It was the exact same fragrance I had inhaled mere hours ago when I cracked open his hidden wall vault and discovered the forged legal documents. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I leaned into his embrace, allowing the physical contact to seal the illusion of my total ignorance. "I missed you," he murmured, his voice pitched in a low, intimate register. Juneau was miserable. The seminars dragged on forever, and the freezing rain never stopped pouring. I could not wait to get back home to you. I smiled, taking the expensive bouquet from his hands. "I am glad you are back," I replied, keeping my tone soft and accommodating. "I heard the weather down the coast was terrible. Go get settled. Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. Nolan loosened his silk tie and headed upstairs to the master bedroom, entirely unaware that I knew he had spent the last 2 days sipping overpriced scotch in Seattle with offshore trust attorneys. I turned back to the stove, transferring the seared salmon to a ceramic serving platter. The tactical discipline required to maintain this facade was immense, but the adrenaline humming through my veins kept my hands remarkably steady. We gathered around the dining room table a few minutes later. Elise joined us wearing a cashmere lounge set she had undoubtedly purchased with my husband's stolen funds. She sat across from me sipping a tall glass of imported mineral water, her eyes darting between Nolan and me with poorly concealed anticipation. She knew the trap was set. She was simply waiting for her brother to spring the mechanism. Nolan dominated the dinner conversation. He sliced into his salmon, gesturing broadly with his silver fork as he pontificated about the vulnerability of modern corporate infrastructure. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room. I was reviewing some of the network protocols during my flight. Nolan stated casually, taking a sip of his dark red wine. You would be shocked by how naive some business owners are regarding their proprietary data. People leave their digital front doors wide open. I am actually thinking about overhauling the entire filing system at the logistics headquarters. We need to ensure your client databases and seasonal routing algorithms are locked down in an impenetrable vault. In this economy, you cannot trust anyone with sensitive information. The dramatic irony hung over the dining table, heavy and thick. Nolan sat across from me, bragging about his masterful security measures, entirely oblivious to the reality surrounding him. He did not know I possessed Derek's encrypted flash drive. He did not know I had mirrored his entire digital footprint, cracked his bear-proof safe, and memorized the Cayman Islands routing numbers. He was lecturing me on the importance of impenetrable vaults while sitting mere feet away from his own compromised safe, hidden behind the kitchen crockpots. I took a slow bite of my dinner, letting the savory flavor wash over my palate. I agreed with him wholeheartedly, playing the role of the grateful, compliant wife. You are right, I said softly. Security is paramount. I appreciate you looking out for the Enterprise. Elise hid a triumphant smirk behind her water glass, clearly interpreting my gentle compliance as a sign of irreversible mental fatigue. After finishing his meal, Nolan excused himself to unpack his luggage. He walked up the wooden staircase, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. Elise and I remained at the table in silence. I gathered the empty ceramic plates, focusing on the mundane task of clearing the dining room. 10 minutes passed. The quiet anticipation in the air shifted into something sharp and electric. Slow, deliberate footsteps descended the staircase. Nolan entered the dining room, his confident swagger entirely vanished. He wore an expression of profound theatrical devastation, his brow furrowed into a mask of deep concern, and his shoulders slumped under an invisible crushing weight. In his right hand, he clutched the fake moleskin therapy journal I had planted on my nightstand. Beverly, began his voice cracking with artificial sorrow. I was unpacking my suitcase, and this notebook was resting on the floor near the bed. It fell open. I swear I did not mean to pry into your privacy, but I read the first page. I froze, holding a stack of dirty plates against my chest. I let my eyes widen in manufactured panic. I parted my lips, feigning a sudden inability to speak. I dropped my gaze to the hardwood floor, acting like a woman whose deepest, most shameful secrets had just been exposed to the harsh light of day. Nolan closed the distance between us, placing a warm, heavy hand on my trembling shoulder. Honey, why did you not tell me it had gotten this bad? He whispered, tapping the leather cover of the journal. You wrote that you were losing your grip on reality. You wrote that the pressure of the dispatch center is causing severe panic attacks. You even admitted you are making dangerous mistakes with the cargo manifests. I shook my head, squeezing my eyes shut to avoid looking directly into his treacherous face. I did not want you to worry, I lied, forcing my voice into a fragile, breathy whisper. I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just a passing phase. I am so tired, Nolan. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest in a suffocating embrace. Elise stood up from the table, walking over to join the performance. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest in a suffocating embrace. Elise stood up from the table, walking over to join the performance. She placed a gentle hand on my arm, her touch feeling like a crawling spider against my skin. Beverly Elise cooed softly. We are your family. You do not have to hide your struggles from us. You look exhausted. You cannot keep running that sprawling enterprise while your health deteriorates. You need to surrender this burden before it destroys your spirit. I stepped back from the embrace, letting my shoulders round forward in a posture of total defeat. I let my hair fall loose around my face, obscuring the cold, calculated clarity in my eyes. I do not know what to do, I admitted, playing my final card. Nolan seized the opening instantly. He spoke with the commanding tone of a savior stepping in to rescue a fallen victim. The quarterly investor meeting is tomorrow morning, he stated firmly. I cannot let you walk into that boardroom and face those venture capitalists while you are suffering this acute crisis. It is too much pressure. I will take the reins. I looked up at him, projecting hesitant fear. But the board expects a State of the Union address from the chief executive, I argued weakly. I will deliver the address, Nolan countered smoothly, slipping the fake journal into his jacket pocket. I will explain the situation delicately. I will present a restructuring plan to secure their equity, while you take a leave of absence to seek the professional treatment you desperately need. You will attend the meeting, sit by my side, and officially step back. I will handle the hostile questions. I will shield you from the fallout. Let me protect our future. The snare was fully drawn. He wanted me in the room. He wanted me to sit silently while he used the journal and the Lost Apex contract to justify a hostile takeover. He was demanding I hand him the knife he planned to plunge into my back. I nodded slowly, a single tear of relief finally spilling over my lower lash line. Okay, I whispered. I will attend, just to step back. Thank you, Nolan. Nolan exhaled a deep breath, the euphoria radiating from his pores. He believed he had won the war without firing a single shot. The evening dissolved into a sickening display of gentle coddling. Nolan poured me a cup of herbal tea. Eluse offered to draw a warm bath for me. They treated me like glass, eager to preserve my fragile state until the boardroom doors locked behind us the following morning. Hours later, the house plunged into darkness. I lay perfectly still in the master bed, matching the deep, steady rhythm of sleep breathing. Beside me, Nolan shifted under the heavy down comforter. He waited for nearly an hour, ensuring I was deeply asleep. Then he slipped out from beneath the covers. He did not turn on a lamp. He moved with the quiet stealth of a thief in his own home. I kept my eyes closed, listening to the faint rustle of his silk pajamas as he exited the bedroom and padded barefoot down the hallway. He was heading for the staircase. He was descending into the kitchen. He could not resist the urge to review his victory one final time before the sun rose. He was going to pull the crockpots off the top shelf, spin the dial on the heavy steel door, and discover that his impenetrable vault was entirely empty. The calm before the storm had reached its terminal point, and the countdown to his unmasking had officially begun. I waited until his stealthy footsteps faded down the carpeted corridor. Slipping out from under the heavy down comforter, I let the freezing ambient air wash over my skin. The hardwood floorboards felt like solid ice against my bare feet. I wrapped a thick wool robe around my shoulders, tying the sash with deliberate, methodical precision. I bypassed the main staircase, utilizing the narrow rear steps my grandfather originally built for the seasonal maintenance crew. I moved without making a single sound, descending into the dark living room. A solitary crystal wine glass sat on the mahogany coffee table, a leftover remnant from our deceptive dinner hours prior. I sank into the leather wingback chair positioned in the deepest shadow of the room. I held a cup of chamomile tea I had brewed earlier, cradling the lukewarm ceramic mug for tactile grounding. From the adjacent kitchen, the subtle sounds of my husband embarking on his midnight excursion drifted through the archway. First came the scrape of the heavy ceramic crockpots sliding across the wooden pantry shelf. Then followed the mechanical spin of the bear-proof vault dial. Click, click, clack. The heavy steel hinges groaned as the barrier swung open. An ocean of silence flooded the house. I tracked the exact second his brain processed the empty cavity. The quiet transformed into frantic chaos. Metal scraped against metal. Cardboard boxes hit the floor tiles with a dull thud. He was tearing the pantry apart, searching blindly for the ghost of his stolen empire. Heavy, uneven footsteps stomped across the kitchen threshold. Nolan burst into the living room. He reached for the wall switch, flooding the space with harsh, artificial illumination. The sudden light revealed my seated form. He froze in his tracks. His tailored silk pajamas suddenly looked foolish, resembling a child caught stealing from a cookie jar. His face was no longer the handsome, charismatic mask he wore during our salmon dinner. His features were contorted, flushed a deep, mottled purple. The veneer of the loving partner evaporated entirely, replaced by the raw, unhinged panic of a cornered scavenger. "Where are the folders?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a potent mixture of rage and terror. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my mug. The tea was cold, but my nerves were colder. I did not answer him. My silence acted as an accelerant, fueling the fire consuming his composure. He marched across the intricate Persian rug, closing the distance between us with heavy, stomping strides. "You stupid, naive fool," he spat the venom, finally pouring from his lips without restraint. He pointed a shaking finger toward my face. "You think you can play games with me? You are a glorified cargo dispatcher. You haul frozen freight across the tundra. You do not understand the basic mechanics of high finance. That paperwork secures a multi-million-dollar corporate transition. If you destroyed those documents, you have doomed us both." His chest heaved, pulling ragged breaths into his lungs. The polished corporate consultant vanished, leaving behind a desperate, entitled man realizing his meticulously crafted illusion had shattered. "I did not destroy anything, Nolan," I replied smoothly, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I merely relocated the files to a more secure environment, just as you suggested during dinner. We must protect our proprietary data, correct?" The irony struck him like a physical blow. His jaw clenched tight enough to crack his teeth. The veins in his neck bulged against his skin. The terrifying realization dawned on him. The fake therapy journal was a decoy. The entire evening was a carefully orchestrated theater production, and he had played the lead puppet flawlessly. The realization fractured his remaining shred of self-control. He raised his right hand, curling his fingers into a tight ball, and brought his fist crashing down onto the mahogany coffee table. His knuckles struck the crystal wine glass. The delicate stemware exploded upon impact. Shards of crystalline glass launched into the air, raining down across the polished wood and the woven rug. A thin line of crimson blood traced a path down his knuckles, dripping steadily onto the pristine floor. Elise appeared in the doorway, clutching her cashmere robe tight against her chest. She took one look at her brother, bleeding over the shattered mess, her eyes widening in pure horror. The arrogant smirk she wore all evening vanished into the ether. I did not flinch at the destruction. I lowered my ceramic mug to my lap, keeping my posture impeccably rigid. I looked at the ruined glass scattered across the table, then lifted my gaze back to his flushed, hyperventilating face. "You will need to clean that up before you leave," I stated coldly. The flat, emotionless delivery of the command drained the remaining fight from his posture. He stared at me bewildered, recognizing for the first time the ruthless Alaskan survivor hidden beneath his wife's polite exterior. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words failed to materialize. Before he could formulate a response, the heavy oak front door wrenched open. The slab of wood slammed hard against the entryway wall. A gust of sub-zero wind swept through the foyer, carrying a flurry of fresh snow across the threshold. Patricia marched into the living room, flanked by a tall, severe-looking man clutching a thick leather briefcase. She wore a full-length mink coat, her face pinched into a mask of aristocratic fury. She bypassed her bleeding son entirely, marching directly toward my chair. The man beside her was Marcus Sterling, a notorious probate attorney known for executing hostile estate takeovers for Anchorage elite families. Patricia did not wait for the morning boardroom ambush. She brought the execution directly to my living room. "Enough of this pathetic charade," Patricia snapped, her voice cutting through the tense air like a serrated blade. She gestured toward the lawyer. Marcus promptly extracted a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase, presenting them like a weapon. "You have pushed my patience to the breaking point." Beverly Patricia hissed, her eyes narrowing into dark slits. "We know your mental state has collapsed. We have the medical invoices from the Seattle Institute. We have your personal diary documenting your psychotic break. If you do not sign these property deeds and the corporate transfer over to my son right this second, Marcus will file an emergency injunction at dawn." She leaned forward, planting her manicured hands on the edge of the mahogany table, seemingly unbothered by the shattered crystal beneath her palms. Her designer perfume failed to mask the distinct scent of her desperation. "I will march into open court and publicly declare you incompetent, Patricia," threatened, raising her chin in a display of supreme dominance. "I will drag your grandfather legacy through the mud, and I will have you locked inside a psychiatric ward before the weekend concludes. Sign the papers, or lose your freedom." I looked at the legal threats resting in the attorney's hands. I looked at Patricia, trembling with unearned authority. I looked at Nolan, cradling his bleeding knuckles in the background, while Elise cowered in the shadows. They brought a paper sword to a gunfight, confident that their wealth and social standing guaranteed my submission. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my wool robe with slow, deliberate movements. I towered over the matriarch, drawing upon the immense, unyielding strength required to tame the northern wilderness. I offered her a pristine, chilling smile. "We will discuss it at the board meeting tomorrow," I replied, my tone carrying the quiet, lethal promise of an impending avalanche. The morning sun crested the jagged peaks of the Chugach Mountains, casting long, blinding rays across the frozen expanse of the Anchorage harbor. The golden light pierced the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my downtown boardroom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the sterile, climate-controlled air. I sat at the far end of the sprawling mahogany table, my posture rigid, my expression wiped clean of any readable emotion. The room hummed with a tense, vibrating energy. Every leather chair was occupied by the financial lifeblood of Northern Reach Logistics, the venture capitalists, the regional stakeholders, and the private equity partners had flown in early, at the urgent behest of my husband. They murmured in hushed, anxious tones, sipping black coffee and checking their expensive watches. They smelled blood in the water. The heavy glass doors swung open. Nolan entered the room projecting an aura of solemn, reluctant authority. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, playing the part of the capable corporate savior to perfection. His right hand remained tucked casually into his trouser pocket, concealing the bandaged knuckles he had split open during his raging tantrum in our living room mere hours ago. Patricia glided in right behind him, radiating aristocratic entitlement. She wore a tailored wool dress and her signature pearls, her chin tilted upward in a display of supreme confidence. She took a designated seat near the front, positioning herself as the silent architect of the impending coup. My gaze drifted past the matriarch toward the back row of the gallery. Elise sat near the exit doors, crossing her legs with a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across her face. Wrapped snugly around her neck was a vibrant silk scarf featuring a distinct geometric pattern. It was a limited edition designer piece she had brazenly stolen directly from my personal closet that very morning. The sheer audacity of wearing my stolen clothing to witness my professional execution did not incite anger. It only solidified the icy resolve hardening within my chest. They viewed me as a carcass ready to be picked clean, assuming I lacked the strength to defend my own territory. Nolan walked to the head of the mahogany table, commanding the attention of the nervous room. He dimmed the overhead lights with a remote control, causing the bright digital projector to illuminate the blank wall behind him. The opening slide displayed a stark, descending line graph, painted in a blaring crimson hue. Nolan cleared his throat, adopting the somber, measured cadence of a captain forced to announce his vessel was taking on water. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Nolan began, his voice echoing in the quiet space. "We are facing a critical juncture regarding the future of this enterprise. I called this emergency session because transparency is the foundation of our partnership, and I can no longer shield you from the severe operational deficits threatening your investments." He clicked the remote, advancing to a slide detailing the sudden cancellation of the Apex touring contract. He weaponized the numbers with masterful precision. He twisted standard seasonal freight fluctuations into a narrative of impending bankruptcy. He warned the stakeholders that the logistics network was hemorrhaging capital at an unsustainable rate. He argued the company lacked the decisive, stable leadership required to navigate the harsh subarctic market conditions. The investors shifted uncomfortably in their luxurious seats. Pens tapped nervously against legal pads. Eyes darted toward me, searching for a defense I refused to offer. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the fabricated financial autopsy. Nolan then transitioned from fiscal despair to personal tragedy, shifting the focus of the assault from my business acumen to my very sanity. He lowered his voice, allowing a manufactured, heartbroken tremor to infect his vocal cords. "The structural failures you see on this screen are not born of market forces," Nolan stated, pressing a hand against his chest in a display of profound sorrow. "They are the tragic result of a profound human crisis. My wife has carried the impossible burden of this company for years, and the relentless pressure has finally broken her spirit." He reached inside his suit jacket and produced the fake moleskin notebook I had planted on my nightstand. He held the decoy journal up high for the entire boardroom to witness. The stakeholders stared at the leather-bound book, their expressions morphing from financial concern to deep personal pity. "Beverly has been hiding a severe psychological decline." Nolan lied smoothly, turning to look directly at me with fake tear-filled eyes. "She is suffering from an acute form of bipolar disorder, accompanied by severe paranoid delusions. This notebook contains her own heartbreaking confessions. She admits she is losing her grip on reality. She admits she is making reckless, dangerous decisions regarding your cargo." A collective gasp rippled through the boardroom. A prominent Seattle investor covered her mouth in shock. Patricia nodded solemnly from her front row seat, playing the role of the devastated mother-in-law. "I tried to manage her erratic behavior privately." Nolan continued, wiping a non-existent tear from his cheek. "I arranged high-level psychiatric consultations with specialists in Washington state, hoping we could stabilize her condition before it impacted the dispatch center. But the cancellation of the Apex contract proved her illness has become an active liability. I can no longer prioritize my desire to protect her pride over my fiduciary duty to protect your equity." The atmosphere inside the glass room turned incredibly heavy. The powerful men and women who had watched me build a freight empire out of ice and steel now looked at me like a wounded, helpless animal requiring mercy. They bought the performance entirely. They believed they were witnessing the tragic end of a brilliant career. Patricia caught the eye of her ruthless probate attorney. Marcus Sterling stood up from his chair, pulling a crisp, heavily stapled legal document from his leather briefcase. He walked the length of the long mahogany table, the sound of his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He stopped beside my chair and placed the paperwork directly in front of my folded hands. It was a comprehensive severance package combined with a medical power of attorney transfer. The buyout clause offered a mere fraction of what my grandfather's legacy was truly worth. It was an insulting pittance, a handful of pennies designed to sweep me quietly into a locked psychiatric ward while they seized the kingdom. Nolan remained standing at the front of the room. He stepped out from behind the podium, extending a silver pen toward me across the length of the table. "Beverly, please," Nolan urged, his voice soft and dripping with weaponized empathy. "Do not fight this. Surrender the burden. Sign the transition agreement. Let me step in as chief executive to save the company so you can finally go get the professional help you desperately need." The boardroom fell into a suffocating silence. Dozens of eyes remained fixed on my face, waiting for the inevitable collapse. They expected tears. They expected a frantic, incoherent denial that would only serve to prove my supposed insanity. Elise leaned forward in the back row, her eyes gleaming with triumphant anticipation. Patricia folded her hands in her lap, a victorious smirk playing at the corners of her painted lips. Nolan stood tall, offering the pen, waiting for the broken, defeated woman to sign her entire life away. I looked down at the severance document resting on the polished wood. I looked at the silver pen extended toward me. Then I slowly raised my head, locking my gaze on my treacherous husband, ready to unleash the devastating counterstrike I had meticulously built in the dark. I looked at the silver instrument resting on the polished mahogany wood. I did not reach for it. I did not weep. I stood up from my leather chair, pulling my shoulders back and lifting my chin. The sudden movement disrupted the suffocating tension hanging over the room. I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved my personal computer. Without speaking a single word, I walked over to the podium where my treacherous husband stood. He stepped back, confusion flashing across his handsome features. I unplugged his digital display cable and connected it directly to my own machine. I pressed a single key. The projection on the wall behind us flickered. The descending crimson line graph vanished into the ether. In its place, a complex network of forensic accounting spreadsheets illuminated the dark room. I turned back to my briefcase and extracted 3 dozen thick-bound folders. I began sliding them across the table, distributing the heavy dossiers to every venture capitalist and private equity partner in attendance. The room remained deathly quiet, save for the sound of thick paper sliding over polished wood. "Please open the primary folder," I instructed, my voice echoing with icy authority. "You will find a copy of a commercial loan agreement. This document uses my grandfather commercial warehouse as collateral for a high-risk financial injection. The signature at the bottom belongs to me, or rather, it is designed to look like mine." I pressed a button on a remote control. The bright projector displayed a high-resolution macro photograph of the signature in question. "Note the ink color." I continued pacing slowly behind the seated investors. The stroke is rendered in blue ballpoint ink. Anyone who has ever finalized a contract with Northern Reach Logistics knows I strictly utilize a black felt-tip pen. It is a security measure I adopted years ago to prevent this exact scenario. I then advanced the slide to a photograph of Patricia Stein. She was captured sitting in my home office, holding a custom blue ballpoint pen retrieved from her designer purse. The matriarch forged the commercial lien herself, attempting to leverage my inherited real estate to float her daughter-failing boutique. Patricia stiffened in her front row seat. The color drained from her cheeks, replacing her arrogant flush with a sickly pallor. Nolan stared at the screen, his jaw hanging slightly open. Marcus Sterling, the ruthless probate attorney who had just offered me a severance package, recognized the severe legal peril he had entered. Presenting forged documents in a formal corporate proceeding constituted profound fraud. He quietly closed his briefcase, snapping the brass latches shut, and began inching his chair backward toward the exit. Before the conspirators could formulate a defense, I triggered the next piece of evidence. A video file began playing through the boardroom speakers. The image of Derek, the sycophantic executive assistant employed by my husband, filled the wall. He sat in my freezing server room, sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights. His voice trembled as he confessed to the camera lens. He explained how Patricia ordered him to permanently wipe my client databases and seasonal routing algorithms. He admitted the objective was to artificially cripple the enterprise valuation just before this quarterly meeting. The investors watched the confession in stunned silence. Men and women who had built their fortunes through calculated risk now realized they were being used as pawns in a domestic theft. I advanced the presentation again. This time, the screen displayed the internal email correspondence between Patricia and the Apex Touring Executive Vice President. I read the damning paragraphs aloud. I exposed how my mother-in-law intentionally sabotaged our most lucrative summer contract. She did not merely advise them to cancel. She explicitly instructed them to cite corporate budget shifts to mask her interference. She burned our revenue stream to the ground to manufacture the very crisis Nolan was using to justify his hostile takeover. The venture capitalists began murmuring angrily, flipping through the physical evidence in their hands. The tide had turned entirely. Nolan realized his carefully constructed theater production had collapsed. The false narrative of the grieving husband caring for his mentally unstable wife disintegrated under the weight of empirical proof. He looked frantically at his mother, searching for a lifeline, a sudden excuse, or a strategic retreat. It was the perfect moment to deliver the fatal blow. I switched the projector to display the final set of documents. Rows of international routing numbers filled the screen, tracking a stolen sum of $120,000. You forged a power of attorney document to drain my corporate operating account, I said, addressing my husband directly in front of his peers. You wired the capital to a holding entity located in the Grand Cayman Islands. You believed you were securing a golden parachute before initiating the divorce proceedings. Nolan swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the heavy glass doors. He knew the federal implications of international wire fraud. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought his corporate consulting background made him untouchable. But here is the most fascinating detail I added, lowering my voice to a dangerous, intimate register. Nolan, did you know the offshore shell company you funneled the money into is registered solely in your mother name? The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Nolan froze. His panicked gaze slowly shifted away from the exit and locked onto Patricia. The matriarch sat paralyzed in her chair. The pearl necklace resting against her collarbone clicked softly as she began to tremble. Nolan read the registration documents displayed on the bright wall. He saw the exclusive beneficiary clause. He saw her signature. The truth slammed into him with the force of a runaway freight train. She did not list you as a co-owner, Noel. And I explained, driving the final nail into his coffin. She established the account exclusively under her own jurisdiction. When the banking flags triggered a federal investigation, the authorities would follow the digital trail. They would find the forged transfers initiated by you, but the cash would be sitting safely in her private trust. She was planning to abscond with the stolen capital and leave you holding the bag for felony embezzlement. She was going to let you go to federal prison while she maintained her lavish lifestyle. The fragile alliance forged in greed shattered into a million jagged pieces. Nolan turned on his mother with terrifying ferocity. "You set me up!" he screamed, his voice cracking with raw betrayal. "You told me the offshore account was a joint venture. You used me to forge the transfers." Patricia stood up, her aristocratic composure dissolving into frantic, desperate defense. "Do not be ridiculous!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is manipulating the data. She fabricated those ledgers to tear us apart." But Nolan knew the numbers were real. He recognized the corporate structures he had helped build. The sophisticated boardroom erupted into a chaotic, vicious spectacle. Mother and son hurled venomous accusations at one another, screaming across the polished mahogany table. Nolan accused her of treating him like a disposable asset. Patricia screamed that he was an incompetent fool who ruined their flawless plan. The wealthy investors they had tried to manipulate watched the horrific display in disgusted silence. Elise cowered in the back row, clutching the stolen designer scarf tight against her throat. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. She realized her luxurious free ride had reached a catastrophic end. The scavengers were finally turning their teeth on each other, fighting over the scraps of a failed conspiracy in front of an audience of billionaires. I stood at the podium, watching the inferno consume them. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I simply allowed their inherent toxicity to act as their executioner. Above the deafening roar of their familial civil war, a distinct sound pierced the chaos. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the glass walls. The boardroom doors swung open with undeniable authority. 4 uniformed Anchorage police detectives marched into the room, their duty belts jingling softly in the tense atmosphere. The lead detective held a thick stack of manila folders, mirroring the dossiers I had distributed to the board. The room fell instantly silent. The screaming match ceased. The officers stepped forward, pulling steel handcuffs from their belts, turning their stern gazes toward the architect and the traitor. The lead detective spoke with a calm, practiced cadence that cut through the lingering hysteria inside the glass walls of the boardroom. He stated their names aloud, listing federal charges of wire fraud, grand larceny, and corporate espionage with chilling efficiency. The high-priced probate attorney had already vanished into the elevator banks, abandoning his elite clients the moment the silver handcuffs appeared. Nolan offered no physical resistance. The fight drained from his broad shoulders, leaving him hollow and pathetic. He looked at me one final time, searching for a flicker of mercy, a shred of the compliant wife he thought he had married. I offered him nothing but a flat, uncompromising stare. Patricia, however, fought the humiliation. She demanded phone calls. She threatened the officers with the wrath of her political connections. Her shrieking echoed off the glass walls as they escorted her out, her designer heels dragging across the polished floor. The venture capitalists watched the spectacle in stunned silence, their investments secure, their respect for Northern Reach logistics permanently cemented. I packed my laptop into my leather briefcase and walked out of the corporate headquarters. The freezing midday air felt clean and sharp against my lungs. I drove the winding snow-packed roads back to my residence, feeling the heavy burden of the past 6 years lifting from my shoulders with every passing mile. The house felt remarkably still when I pushed open the heavy oak door. Elise stood in the kitchen, frantically scrolling through her mobile phone, unable to reach her mother or her brother. Her stolen silk scarf was gone, replaced by a cheap synthetic sweater. She looked up, expecting her family to walk through the threshold with a victory narrative. When she saw me, standing alone, her face crumbled into a mask of pure panic. She demanded to know what happened at the meeting. I bypassed her frantic questions, walking straight to the hallway closet. I pulled my heavy winter parka from the hanger and retrieved a digital stopwatch from my pocket. I informed her that her brother and mother were currently undergoing processing at the Federal Detention Center downtown. I then told her she had exactly 10 minutes to pack her belongings and vacate my property. She scoffed, assuming I was making an empty threat. I hit the start button on the timer. The digital numbers began counting backward. I explained that when the clock reached 0, the deadlocks would engage, regardless of whether she was inside or outside. She realized I was not negotiating. A chaotic scramble ensued. Elise sprinted up the stairs, hurling her cheap garments into her luggage with reckless abandon. She dragged her suitcases down the wooden steps, the plastic wheels bouncing loudly against the hardwood. When she reached the entryway, the timer beeped. I opened the front door, letting the subarctic wind howl into the foyer. She stepped out onto the icy porch, shivering instantly in the negative-degree temperatures she had complained about since her arrival. I closed the door, sliding the heavy deadbolt into place. She pounded her fists against the thick wood for a few minutes, but the freezing wind soon silenced her protests. She was forced to face the brutal Alaskan winter on her own. The legal fallout moved with surgical efficiency over the following weeks. My corporate litigator and forensic accountant dismantled the remaining threats with precise litigation. The forged commercial loan was invalidated, securing my grandfather warehouse forever. Derek, the sycophantic assistant who tried to erase my client database, avoided a federal prison sentence by cooperating fully with the prosecution. However, his betrayal earned him a permanent place on the industry blacklist. No reputable logistics firm in the state would hire him. To survive, he was forced to accept employment with one of my minor subcontractors. He now works the most grueling, punishing night shift delivery route in the territory, hauling frozen freight across treacherous ice roads in a cab with a malfunctioning heater. To cover the extensive legal damages and punitive fines incurred by the forged collateral, the court ordered the liquidation of Patricia's assets. Her prized socialite estate, the sprawling mansion where she hosted her elite galas and plotted my demise, was transferred directly into my corporate portfolio. I did not move into the extravagant property. Instead, I stripped away the velvet curtains and imported chandeliers, transforming the fortress into a training facility and corporate retreat for my logistics pilots. The grand dining hall where she once served caviar became a functional mess hall. The manicured lawns were soon covered by heavy-duty snowplows and cargo trucks. Every time a rugged bush pilot tracked muddy boots across her pristine marble foyer, the victory felt tangible. The epicenter of her arrogance became a functional tool for the very enterprise she tried to destroy. The divorce finalized rapidly. Nolan possessed no leverage, no capital, and no future. He signed the dissolution papers from a sterile visitation room behind thick security glass, stripped of his tailored suits and his expensive cedarwood cologne. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit, his hands trembling as he pushed the documents across the metal table. He traded his illusion of power for the stark reality of a federal indictment, finally realizing he was just a disposable pawn in his larger scheme. I retained sole ownership of Northern Reach Logistics, expanding our operations into the northernmost territories before the spring thaw arrived. My business thrived, unburdened by the scavengers who had tried to hollow it out from the inside. A month after the boardroom confrontation, I woke up early. The house was quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the furnace and the settling of the wooden beams. I brewed a pot of strong, dark roast coffee, letting the bitter, earthy aroma fill the kitchen. I poured a steaming mug and walked out onto the back deck. The freezing morning air stung my cheeks, a sharp, bracing reminder of the environment I called home. I stood at the wooden railing, looking out toward the jagged horizon. The sun began its slow ascent over the Chugach Mountains. The sky transformed from a deep, bruised purple into a brilliant canvas of gold and pink. The light reflected off the snow-capped peaks, creating a blinding, majestic display of natural power. I took a slow sip of the hot liquid, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I thought about the journey that brought me to this peaceful morning. The betrayal could have broken me. The psychological warfare was designed to make me doubt my own mind, to surrender my territory out of manufactured exhaustion. But they misunderstood the fundamental nature of the woman they targeted. They expected a fragile victim, willing to bend to their demands to keep the peace. They failed to realize that bending is a choice. And when you stop twisting yourself to accommodate toxic people, you discover the true density of your own spine. My grandfather taught me how to identify predators and scavengers in the wild. He taught me that surviving the harsh winter requires discipline, patience, and a ruthless commitment to protecting your own camp. Nolan and Patricia operated on greed and deception, building their plans on shifting sand. I built my defense on solid rock, utilizing the very tools they underestimated. I did not just survive the storm, I harnessed its energy. I looked down at my hands, free of the wedding band that had once symbolized a false partnership. The skin was rough from years of manual labor, strong and capable. I owned my home. I owned my company. I owned my future. The wilderness stretched out before me, vast and untamed. It is a place that does not tolerate weakness, a place that rewards those who stand their ground. The scavengers were gone, banished to the cold cages they built for themselves. I lifted my coffee mug toward the rising sun, offering a silent toast to the quiet strength found in resilience. When you refuse to be a victim, you become as untouchable as the rugged Alaskan landscape itself. The echoes of a shattered family do not fade quietly. They linger in the empty spaces of a home, in the quiet chill of a winter morning, and in the profound stillness that follows a storm. When I reflect on the ruins of Nolan and Patricia's lives, scattered across the polished mahogany of a downtown Anchorage boardroom, I realize that their downfall was not merely a tragedy of corporate greed. It was at its very core a devastating failure of parenting. The story we just witnessed is not just a thriller about forensic accounting or forged signatures. It is a mirror reflecting the deepest, most uncomfortable truths about family responsibility, the values we instill in our children, and the generational legacy we leave behind. In modern American culture, we often confuse providing for our children with protecting them from reality. Patricia raised Nolan in a world insulated by wealth status and an unwavering belief in his own exceptionalism. She constructed a pristine, climate-controlled environment where his missteps were paved over with money and his sense of entitlement was nourished as if it were a virtue. She believed she was being a fiercely devoted mother. She believed she was building a dynasty. But by shielding him from accountability, she stripped him of his moral compass. She did not raise a survivor. She raised a scavenger. True family responsibility extends far beyond securing financial inheritances or defending a bloodline against perceived outsiders. The traditional family structure, when functioning at its highest, most noble capacity, is a crucible for character. It is the sacred space where a child first learns the uncompromising laws of fairness, honesty, and emotional awareness. When parents replace these foundational pillars with a hollow pursuit of victory at any cost, they plant the seeds of their own eventual destruction. Patricia taught her son that other human beings, even the woman he married, were merely stepping stones to be used and discarded. She should not have been surprised when, blinded by the very greed she cultivated within him, he ultimately decided to use her as a stepping stone too. The betrayal between mother and son was not an accident. It was the only logical harvest of the seeds she had sown. Contrast this tragic dynamic with the legacy left by Beverly's grandfather, Elias. He did not leave behind a fortune in offshore shell companies or a network of high society connections. Instead, he left behind a framework for survival deeply rooted in the rugged, unforgiving reality of the Alaskan wilderness. He taught Beverly how to read the snow, how to distinguish the deliberate, honorable path of a predator from the frantic, opportunistic trail of a scavenger. More importantly, he taught her that the world does not owe you warmth. You must build your own fire. Elias understood that long-term guidance for children requires the courage to let them face the elements. He instilled a deep emotional awareness in his granddaughter, teaching her to observe, to remain calm under pressure, and to understand that true integrity is what you do when the winter wind is howling and no one else is watching. This is the essence of traditional American resilience. It is the understanding that fairness is not about everyone getting equal shares of the pie, but about everyone being held to the same unyielding standard of truth. You cannot gaslight a blizzard. You cannot forge a signature to bypass a frozen river. Nature demands profound honesty, and Elias raised a woman who mirrored that natural law. When we examine our own roles as parents, guardians, or mentors, we are forced to ask ourselves which legacy we are passing down. Are we raising children who know how to navigate the wilderness of life with honor? Or are we raising children who only know how to manipulate the system from the comfort of a heated room? Emotional awareness in raising children means possessing the fortitude to tell them when they are wrong. It means allowing them to experience the bitter sting of failure, the weight of a consequence, and the quiet dignity of earning their own way. As we navigate the complex, often treacherous waters of our own family dynamics, it is crucial to remember that stories like Beverly's are not just entertainment. They are parables for our modern age. If you find yourself captivated by these deep dives into the human condition, by the intricate tapestries of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate justice, I invite you to follow Samantha Told Stories. Join our community as we continue to explore the profound narratives that challenge our perspectives and illuminate the hidden corners of the human heart. Looking out over the metaphorical Chugach Mountains of our own lives, we must confront a startling reality about love and responsibility. We are conditioned by society to believe that a parent's ultimate duty is to clear the path for their child, to remove the stones, and to ensure they never stumble. We measure our success as mothers and fathers by the amount of comfort we can provide, by the pain we can intercept before it strikes. But this is a dangerous illusion. Perhaps the most radical, unconventional truth of parenting is that comfort is the enemy of character. The cruelest thing you can do to a child is to ensure they never feel the cold. By rushing to save them from every consequence, by fiercely defending their worst impulses in the name of family loyalty, you do not insulate them from the world. You render them entirely defenseless against it. True love is not a shield. It is a sharpening stone. The greatest act of devotion a parent can offer is to step back and let the winter wind hit their child's face, knowing that the chill is the only thing that will teach them how to build a fire that will last a lifetime. When you look at the children sleeping under your roof tonight, ask yourself a terrifying question. Are you building a sanctuary that will keep them safe? Or are you building a cage of comfort that will ensure they never learn how to survive? The answer may change the entire trajectory of their lives and yours.